this before. Very similar event happened just later this week, but this time in Tanzania. And I think what you're actually starting to see is the impact of greater temperatures on the surface of various lakes, closed bodies, and obviously the ocean, and it's starting to play its role. Fourth story, I brought this up. This was in relation to a release that we did. We were talking about microplastics, but at the same time, we also had a discussion about renewable energy. And I went on and on about how China was playing a big role towards, they had an ambition, the termite mind, that basically once it focuses on getting rid of climate change or getting rid of their emissions, that everything kind of just focuses on that and they start acting upon it. Of interest, China, just almost 2 days after I issued that report, issued their statement basically saying that they intend to have 1/5, 20% of their entire energy requirements completely off-grid by 2030. Now this is a big undertaking. They intend to do it by wind. At the moment, just to show you the kind of extent that they're doing, at the moment China is powered 147 megawatts of their supply from wind. Combined, that is larger and more power than what they're doing in the entire area of Europe, entire area of the United States in terms of wind power. China has also gone ahead and said that this is just the beginning. They're going to try and do more, but adding photovoltaics in their case. And it just goes to show you that when you have a concerted mind driven on the point, getting rid of these harmful emissions caused by coal-fired power stations, nuclear power stations, that you can actually do it, that it is achievable. And not only is it achievable, it's achievable by large economies. We also have to weigh this up with the fact, though, that China basically produces roughly 70% of the world's global emissions in terms of carbon and CO2 emissions and methane, and they cause a lot of damage, but it's a really good step on their behalf, something that they've taken forward and something that we're really impressed about here on the Mother Channel. Our final story is in relation to an event that came out in the United States, and I find this quite ironic because we did cover microplastics and other chemical pollutants that were entering the waterways. Well, in the United States, a new study that's been done has found that there's a kind of toxin, or rather a chemical called PFAS. You can go Google it. As I said, I'll add the link below us. And what it is industrial chemicals that are used in the washing process, also in the manufacture of various bags, manufacturing of different kind of industrial components, often used as a fire kind of retardant in terms of airports and military bases, etc. And they found that roughly 6 million American people are affected by this phenomenon of increased toxins inside of the water, increased chemicals inside the water, and it's having a long-term negative effect, can cause obesity, cause cancer, and obviously have various other genetic effects that can impact upon the populace. And this is just goes hand in hand with that kind of story that we did about microplastics, where we're talking about how we don't really take care of our groundwater, how we don't take care of our waterways, and how the runoff of chemicals is starting to have an impact on people. And here you have a prime example, a study done by MIT in relation to the amount of kind of toxins and chemicals inside the water is now not only detectable, but they believe that the effects may be wider spread, meaning that it's, in this case, it goes across 33 states, but they believe it may be wider spread than that. They believe it may be impacting more people, and that the events or the effects of it are yet to be seen, but it is unacceptably high, and there's very, very little that they can actually do about it. This is water that is done, goes back into the kind of estuaries, goes back into the underground aquifers, and is drawn up for use by the municipalities or the councils in order to provide drinking water. And there's nothing you can do in terms of neutralizing the chemicals in it, and thus it brings about a massive problem in terms of drinking supply. Now, you'll probably find, in my opinion, that since it's having a direct impact upon people, that you might find that the municipalities or the councils or the government, they act a lot faster. But I bear with me a little on this, I just find it a little funny that they act upon it when it has a direct impact, that they are able to notice able to see, they're able to kind of respond to it, but nobody is talking about the other kind of areas that are surrounding it that are obviously awash with chemicals, generally flooding out into the oceans, into large lake bodies, and nobody's really accounting for that, mainly because it's not part of the drinking supply. But obviously, it's having an impact on the biology or the biomechanisms of all those ocean species or fish species or algae species or really beneficial kind of, requirements of a generally healthy ecosystem. So I think that this is a story that you're starting to see like a little front tip of, and I expect that this is going to go a hell of a lot further very, very soon. Now, we're wrapping this up because we're going to go out and watch that movie. I hope you've enjoyed my update. It's been a little bit chaotic because we're kind of in a public place and a whole lot of people walking up and down, so I expect a few jump cuts here and there. As usual, if you've got any good stories that are happening in an area around you, take a clip, send it in, we'll screen it up. And I would like to thank you for joining me on this beautiful day, well, overcast day for us, but a beautiful day, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Hello and welcome to the Mother Channel. My name is Jason Saul, and today we are reporting live from the steps of the beautiful Rhodes Memorial in the Mother City, Cape Town. The Mother Channel is the channel that brings you news, live interviews and current events that are happening around the world in terms of the environment, climate change and various other topics that are related to sustainability. One of the reasons why we're filming from here as opposed to our normal locations in the deep south or near the beach or in the beautiful rolling forests is that we're going to go watch a movie called Normal Is Over, which is a movie that won numerous awards at the Cannes Film Festival. It's a strikingly good story and well done, well put together, and I urge you, if you have an opportunity, to go check it out, see what you think for yourself, and maybe post some reviews about what you think about it below. We will of course add a link below me over here that will tell you a bit about it and give you a little taster of what it's like. The first story, and probably one of the most important stories, is related to the sea levels and the rising of the sea, which has for a long period of time been used by global warming skeptics as an indicator of whether or not global warming is actually happening or not. Now, one of the problems being is they've started recording accurately from space, in this case, sea level rise since 1991. And for a long period of time, there'd only been an annual increase of roughly 3 millimeters per year. And for most of this period, global warming skeptics have used this to their advantage to state that global warming is simply not happening. Take a look at the sea levels. Nothing seems to be showing on the sea levels, and thus the entire concept of climate change or man-made climate change is completely flawed. Further analysis of this information has picked up that in 1991, since the records started, there was a massive volcanic explosion. In fact, one of the largest recorded since 1991, and the output of that volcanic ash actually caused a global sea level decrease. And so as a result, the starting block for this data was it started off on a low level, and thus it made a flaw, an ongoing flaw that was picked up inside of the information going forward. And they expect now that the events, or rather the chemical kind of the atmospheric makeup, has started to subside as a result of that volcanic activity. They expect to see a far more dramatic increase in the level of sea level that is happening at the moment. There has actually been a massive reduction in the amount of food being taken up by, in this case, humpback whales. They are one of the toothed kind of whale species. They go along with killer whales and dolphins, obviously, but humpback whales in specific, as part of their hunting kind of lines. They dive down deep below the ocean. They roll onto their side and they scoop up eels that formed a large proportion of their diet. They can hold their breath for 30 minutes, so it wasn't a big problem for them. But as they started studying, trying to see what would happen, they noticed that as ships were passing, that the whales were no longer able to scoop up the fish. They would actually pull out of their dive, and they've realized that either they're picking up the kind of transoceanic traffic as being a threat to them and pulling out their dive, or they are unable to accurately sense where the ground floor is in order for them to turn it over, scoop up their meal. And this is to a certain extent, whales have in a way adapted to the level of noise that is made by this kind of traffic. But this is the first study that goes to show that our impact upon whale species is actually having a longer term negative effect. It remains to be seen whether this impacts other species, but the study is still ongoing. In Croatia, a series of kind of events that took place that basically increased temperatures around the seas, around the oceans, basically caused the dieback of 10,000 fish. Now, this was a huge problem. Thousands of people flocked to the beaches, and they were stumbled across this insane sight where the whole ocean floor was just filled and filled and filled with thousands and thousands of fish dying. And this was a big problem. Obviously, it was a big smell. The authorities basically stepped in. They stopped people from picking up the fish. Obviously, they're poisonous because they've been sitting out in the sun. As it turns out, the water is too hot, and this hotness has basically caused massive oxygen drops inside of the water, which brought about the demise of fish. And the fish were basically trying to escape these zones of low oxygen, and this is what caused the event. Now, although they say it is a semi-natural event, it has never been recorded on this volume before. They've never seen the number of fish species like this before. Very similar event happened just later this week, but this time in Tanzania. And I think what you're actually starting to see is the impact of greater temperatures on the surface of various lakes, closed bodies, and obviously the ocean, and it's starting to play its role. Fourth story, I brought this up. This was in relation to a release that we did. We were talking about microplastics, but at the same time, we also had a discussion about renewable energy. And I went on and on about how China was playing a big role towards, they had an ambition, the termite mind, that basically once it focuses on getting rid of climate change or getting rid of their emissions, that everything kind of just focuses on that and they start acting upon it. Of interest, China, just almost 2 days after I issued that report, issued their statement basically saying that they intend to have 1/5, 20% of their entire energy requirements completely off-grid by 2030. Now, this is a big undertaking. They intend to do it by wind. At the moment, just to show you the kind of extent that they're doing, at the moment, China is powered 147 megawatts of their supply from wind. Combined, that is larger and more power than what they're doing in the entire area of Europe, the entire area of the United States in terms of wind power. China has also gone ahead and said that this is just the beginning. They're going to try and do more, but adding photovoltaics in their case. And it just goes to show you that when you have a concerted mind driven on the point, getting rid of these harmful emissions caused by coal-fired power stations, nuclear power stations, that you can actually do it, that it is achievable. And not only is it achievable, it's achievable by large economies. We also have to weigh this up with the fact, though, that China basically produces roughly 70% of the world's global emissions in terms of carbon and CO2 emissions and methane, and they cause a lot of damage, but it's a really good step on their behalf, something that they've taken forward and something that we're really impressed about here on the Mother Channel. Our final story is in relation to an event that came out in the United States, and I find this quite ironic because we did cover microplastics and other chemical pollutants that were entering the waterways. Well, in the United States, a new study that's been done has found that there's a kind of toxin, or rather a chemical called PFAS, You can go Google it, or as I said, I'll add the link below us. And what it is the industrial chemicals that are used in the washing process, also in the manufacture of various bags, manufacturing of different kind of industrial components, often used as a fire kind of retardant in terms of airports and military bases, etc. And they found that roughly 6 million American people are affected by this phenomenon of increased toxins inside of the water, increased chemicals inside of the water, and it's having a long-term negative effect, can cause obesity, cause cancer, and obviously have various other genetic effects that can impact upon the populace. And this is just goes hand in hand with that kind of story that we did about microplastics, where we're talking about how we don't really take care of our groundwater, how we don't take care of our waterways, and how the runoff of chemicals is starting to have an impact on people. And here you have a prime example, a study done by MIT in relation to the amount of kind of toxins and chemicals inside the water is now not only detectable, but they believe that the effects may be wider spread, meaning that it's, in this case, it goes across 33 states, but they believe it may be wider spread than that. They believe it may be impacting more people, and that the events or the effects of it are yet to be seen, but it is unacceptably high, and there's very, very little that they can actually do about it. This is water that is done, goes back into the kind of estuaries, goes back into the underground aquifers, and is drawn up for use by the municipalities or the councils in order to provide drinking water. And there's nothing you can do in terms of neutralizing the chemicals in it, and thus it brings about a massive problem in terms of drinking supply. Now, you'll probably find, in my opinion, that since it's having a direct impact upon people, that you might find that the municipalities or the councils or the government, they act a lot faster. But I bear with me a little on this, I just find it a little funny that they act upon it when it has a direct impact, that they are able to notice, able to see, they're able to kind of respond to it, but nobody is talking about the other kind of areas that are surrounding it that are obviously awash with chemicals, generally flooding out into the oceans, into large lake bodies, and nobody's really accounting for that, mainly because it's not part of the drinking supply. But obviously, it's having an impact on the biology or the biomechanisms of all those ocean species or fish species or algae species or really beneficial kind of requirements of a generally healthy ecosystem. So I think that this is a story that you're starting to see like a little front tip of, and I expect that this is going to go a hell of a lot further very, very soon. Now, we're wrapping this up because we're going to go out and watch that movie. I hope you've enjoyed my update. It's been a little bit chaotic because we're kind of in a public place and a whole lot of people walking up and down, so I expect a few jump cuts here and there. As usual, if you've got any good stories that are happening in an area around you, take a clip, send it in, we'll screen it up. And I would like to thank you for joining me on this beautiful day, well, overcast day for us, but a beautiful day, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. How the pollutants, now if you imagine surrounding a dam or any kind of enclosed water system, the level of pollutants runoff that comes from farming. So now because they don't cover their topsoil, water is unable to accumulate, it's unable to get to the water aquifer, the sub aquifer. And it's also not retained in the topsoil for other organisms to use. So what happens is there's a lot of runoff caused going into various different dams. Now you have a farmer, and what the farmer does is he's got an issue with some bug or some other whatever bug, and he goes and sprays his crops with pesticides. You see them, they're dusting, and that runoff of the poisons or the pesticides goes into the water system. From the water system, all rivers flow to the sea, and what's happening is you're having a huge, almost like a source of poison, where before you would have these seawater nurseries, or what they call estuaries, these large mouths in which there was a mixture between seawater and fresh water, and it would be like a nursery for many different kinds of fish. And now all it is becoming is it's poisoning different kinds of fish. You've got fish larvae that has been impacted by microplastics. You've got huge amounts of pesticides pouring out into the oceans, and all of this is starting to have an overall effect, of which we're seeing. And a good example of our overall effect is, I don't know, remember about last month, we reported on India having a 51-degree temperature. Well, India this month again broke its new record. So it's actually climbed above itself. So it was 52.6 degrees. So the impacts of what we're doing, even though it's not happening here in this beautiful place, or you may be sitting wherever you are watching this, it is happening. They lost, the Indonesian chain lost 5 islands. They're completely submerged. They're underwater. The impacts of what we are doing is starting to be easily discoverable. It's no longer, groundbreaking scientific research that comes out. Now, I'll tell you, this is a little bit complicated what I'm going to say now about this report that was based on, anti-global warming kind of skeptics, or global warming skeptics rather. They always claimed that one of their big kind of bullets that they always used to fire was so boring, listening to them go on and on, like trying to dredge up science that has been long, kind of solved. But anyway, one of their things was they were saying, look, if you look at the Arctic and you see like the Arctic looks, is got a certain kind of pattern and a lot of collection of pollution, a lot of collection of carbon dioxide, and there is water runoff obviously that's happening in the Arctic, and it's viable and visible, and we can report on this. Oh my lord.
No, don't worry, Joe.
Okay, all right, sorry, I'm just watching the wildlife behind us just like freaking out, but we're fine. The wildlife is freaking out, but we're okay. So I'm really okay. But then they always so then they always pointed to Antarctica. And they said, ha, but look there, in Antarctica, you're not seeing any of this. Goes to show you that carbon dioxide how can carbon dioxide only be having effect in the Arctic? It's not happening in the Antarctica, and therefore it cannot be carbon dioxide or global warming based on carbon dioxide. It cannot be like this. And so, again, inside of this week, another report was issued as to why Antarctica is not showing any signs of kind of melt. Well, the same degree of melt, there is still obviously melt. And what was proven was that the water temperature at the top is increasing, but because Antarctica has deeper kind of chasms all around us, much deeper water, they've got ancient freezing water that's been sitting without contact with sunlight for hundreds of thousands of years, and that water is being lifted to the surface. So as the top water heats up, it lowers the pressure, the groundwater starts to rise up to the surface, makes like a bit of a convection, but with that it brings a whole new cooling into that area. It's actually keeping the bottom of Antarctica cool, it's keeping the seas around Antarctica cool. Now obviously there is a life span to how long it can do this, because even it's not an endless supply of ancient water, but there is a convectional layer that's happening, that's a thermal layer if you want, that's allowing the cooling impact of that water to be raised to the surface, and therefore is protecting Antarctica. Now the joke of this whole thing is that if you think about it, there was always going to be a logical reason. People that are around you that are, global warming skeptics or climate change skeptics, whatever you want to call them, they will always try and latch on to something else, like something else, And every time they've latched onto something, we had the heat island effect, we had solar radiation effect, we had they're always trying to latch onto something, because if you accept that the climate change is a really real event, take a look at just where we are. We're in the middle of winter, and it's kind of like a heat wave here. The UK is having floods and cold temperatures, and Europe as well. And it's record lows that are happening in Europe. And yet here we are, and we're still debating the science. Anybody that is coming up with a concept that that says anything that climate change is bullshit, because you've just got to stop listening. You've got to actually just tune your brain out, because they actually have no idea what they're talking about. And for every argument they keep bringing against it, in a matter of months that argument is torn to pieces, scientifically torn to pieces, and refuted. So it's a waste of time, it's a waste of energy. And the events on the ground are starting to become easily observable, And we've really got to start to change our story. We've really got to start. And that's what I was trying to get back to, like here we sit as just normal people doing normal things on a normal daily basis. And we've got to understand that we are the last people that can bring about some change. There is one big revolution left for every person watching us. Every single person. There is one big revolution, and it's going to happen. It's going to happen. We have to start to change the way the world is working. And the only way we are going to do this is when we start to talk about it, when we bring it up to mainstream media, when we apply pressure on politicians to start to change the way your countries are being run. And until politicians are started to be vetted, not on, hey, I'll give you all great jobs and we'll stop buying from China, and until they are vetted on their green credentials, their credentials to build a sustainable future for your country, for your kids, for your grandchildren, until that happens, nothing is going to change. The power that be will continue to vest ourselves in oil, gas, fracking, any source of easy power, any source of easy money. And that's what they're going to keep doing. But the revolution is real. It's happening now. You need to join in. You need to join us on ENN. Why am I the only guy talking on ENN? Why hasn't some guy in the United States or some guy in UK or some guy in Australia or some guy in China, wherever, sent in a clip exactly like my clip explaining what's going on in China? Let's find out what's going on in China, what's going on in the United States. Start reporting on events that are happening around you. Let's bring those events, let's make it part of the mainstream media, and together we can actually start to change the world. That's about all that I've got for you today. Remember, we are looking for people to submit stories. I've just covered that. The baboons are starting to worry me a little, so I think I'm probably going to split really fast any moment now. So without further ado, I hope you guys have a great week. I'll chat to you probably in the middle of this week again, and maybe again at the end of the weekend. So have a great week, have a great day, and I'll see you later. Hello and good morning everyone. My name is Jason Saul. I'm reporting live for the Environmental News Network, coming to you from the Mother Channel. We are filming today in the Constantia, the Constantia Valley. As you can see behind me, it's that backdrop that is absolutely beautiful, and last time we were here was filled with baboons. So our producers seem to think that since I was not attacked last time, that it is a fairly safe location. And they also just happened to mention that should I be attacked, it would make for some great footage. Apparently that goes down very well and gets a lot of hits if you see people getting attacked by baboons. So I'm going to cover a couple of stories today, and then I'm going to revert back to a little kind of line that I think we need to start talking about. The first stories are related, in fact they're closely related, and it's something that all of you can actually pick up on. There was a study that was recently done in the Arctic relating to the volume of methane that is still trapped within the Arctic. Now they estimate that roughly 1,000 gigatons of methane is trapped under the permafrost within the Arctic. The good news about this is, for the moment, it appears that it is remaining stable. In other words, there's not a lot of leaking of either methane or carbon dioxide, because certain processes take place that will either strip the water down and put it into the riverways, into the runways, and it will actually convert it to a carbon dioxide as opposed to a methane. But for the moment, they appear to be remaining stable while the temperature remains consistent. Now, scientists have been concerned about this mainly because they have picked up sporadic, so meaning they've picked up increase in temperatures, daily increase in temperatures, but overall the net impact that it's have on climate, which is the big difference between weather and climate. Weather is something that happens in a short space of time, like what is the weather today? It's windy and middle of winter, whereas climate is the averaged conditions over a long period of time. So anyway, this has been happening, and because the climate has remained still, even though it's climbing, it's still remained within what is considered tolerable to keep it in a permafrost condition. It's still stable, which is good news. However, if you then consider a report that came out from Alaska regarding a phenomena that they're calling watermelon snow or pink snow, I think the two are actually related, and here's why. Okay, pink snow is basically a buildup of algae, so algae and certain bacteria that eat kind of vegetation matter and things that were trapped underneath the snow. And as a result of their eating of these things, their bodies discolor, and it creates the effect, what is called pink snow. Now, pink snow is problematic, okay? First of all, you can't eat it. So don't anyone go there thinking it's like strawberry, I'm going to eat the snow. It's really bad for you, it's highly toxic. It's not great, okay? But the problem is with a little effect called the albedo effect. And what we know about the albedo effect is that basically it's an indicator of the amount of light that is reflected. So if you imagine a pure white surface that is snow, it reflects, close on 90 to 95% of all light. So light hits snow, reflects out, and this is what keeps the area cool. However, now that the snow is pink, there is a dramatic reduction in the albedo effect. In this case, it's down to about 30%. So the snow is actually absorbing a lot more energy and therefore a lot more heat, and that in turn is causing a lot more melt, and that in turn is actually causing more albedo effects. So there's actually a little loop that is happening within that, a small feedback loop that is happening within that area, and you can expect this to increase. Now, in my opinion, which is a layman's opinion, my opinion is that what you're seeing in Alaska is what is going to be soon seen in the Arctic, because the algae and the bacteria are there primarily to eat the decomposing matter that is trapped beneath the ice. So my feeling is that the watermelon pink snow is actually an early warning of a decomposition process within that area, and I think you're going to see a lot more of this, and I think it's something to keep an eye on. And just remember, everyone, please, no eating the snow. Some good news came out of Germany today. Remember in my last kind of update to you, I said that I'll be giving you some good news. Well, the good news was, first of all, that the methane remains stable. Some other good news that came in from Germany today is that they've banned fracking. Hydraulic press fracking in this case. That now it has no direct impact upon their oil and kind of refining kind of stuff that they're doing. They will still continue with oil and refining, but for the meantime, they have completely banned all fracking, which is a great step forward for Germany. I must also just say that I've had a lot of online battles because I'm a bit of a troll when it comes to that. I go on to a lot of pro-oil, pro kind of methane, pro-fracking kind of sites, and I voice my opinion and I try to convert people. I've had running arguments with lobbyists for fracking. It's actually a strange concept if you think about it, but the fracking industry has employed professional lobbyists, and their sole job is to change the minds of you, okay? That's their job. So what they would do is that they've got huge budgets where I've got no budget, okay? They've got massive budgets, no budget, okay? And their massive budgets, they basically take a whole lot of professional people. These are people that they work out great advertising. These are people that work out how to word something, so copywriters. These are people that have entrances to the newspaper, and they will find anything that has even slightly some positive kind of return for fracking, and they will push it. They will pay for media advertising. They will make sure it's leaked to all the press. They will make sure that it hits on all your Facebook accounts and hits on any other possible news source that they can, and they try to make the science of fracking sound credible. Whereas already we know that fracking is not credible. Fracking is not a credible way of conducting business. And the way that they go about raising money for fracking is absolutely mind-numbing. It's based on that whole concept of where you completely discount the negative effects that you have upon the environment, and you only solely focus upon the cash that you can obtain and return back to your investors. In this case, the investors are super happy, pockets full of cash, but the people that are living in those areas commonly in water restricted areas are suffering because of leak that's gone back into their waterways. Some people have completely run out of water and they still believe it is viable. So now what the fracking industry has done, and I'm convinced that this is actually a twist from the fracking industry, although I haven't actually gone into it much, but they've had a couple of scientists, they've employed a bunch of scientists, and what those scientists did is they developed a method that would change what they're doing in terms of fracking. So in fracking, they will inject water, sand, and generally a bunch of other chemicals into the soil, and via the pressure, almost like a sponge system, they will squeeze out the oil. Well, in this case, the scientists said, look, I've got an idea. We will inject carbon dioxide into that kind of mixture as well. And so in a state, it's liquefied carbon dioxide. So in its state, they are now proposing it forward as a means of carbon sequestration. Now, I see it personally as a desperate attempt by the fracking industry to somehow gain back some kind of green footprint that they lost long ago after they poisoned people's wells and lost court battles in the United States. But nevertheless, they've now started to pay scientists, and us in the climate change, kind of world, we've seen this before. We saw it when Exxon, previously a big proponent or a supporter of climate change and the science behind climate change, did that amazing about shift where they all of a sudden started paying thousands and thousands of scientists just to cast doubt on climate change. And so a lot of the people that you have running around, those morons that go, oh, the climate change is not real. It's not real, I tell you. The science is false. All of those people, they have merely been influenced by the work that Exxon has done in terms of funding scientists to come up with absolute rubbish about why the science of climate change and why the science behind climate change is false. Now, I'll come back to that in a minute. I'm going to cover one more little story. I want to bring this up because I think that this is kind of relevant, okay? So they've now just finished in the United States, they've finished mapping the impact that renewables is having upon coal, and therefore coal upon renewables. And they handed it over to some MIT graduates. They said, calculate the kind of chain, the financial viability of this all. Now, as you know, coal is a cheap form of energy. And thus it's always put forward to we need some power stations. Let's build a coal station. In China, they were building a coal station like every week. Every week a new coal-fired power station will go up because it's got to feed China's expanding economy. But the thing is that for the first time, they were actually able to mathematically prove the impact that renewables was having upon coal and the financial viability that renewables was having upon coal. So they were saying that where before coal could be considered a cheap form of power, that renewables is now playing a part, that the line between the two is really, really thin, meaning that they're actually almost neck on neck in terms of renewable versus coal. Now, renewable as based in the US is considerably more expensive than everywhere else because they've got I don't know why, but it's much more expensive by comparison to here in South Africa. In South Africa, we produce renewable energy at a really cheap rate, whereas in the United States it seems to be dramatically more expensive. Not sure why, but the point is that if you go, there was a study done by a hackathon group, which I like, that was basically, they produced a coal map. So if you go online, you go Google coal map, you will see the impacts and the studies that were done in this regard. And you will see very clearly that the one missing point that they did from this whole mixture is the same missing point that they've done in Germany, that they've also just done now, where they've completely excluded the byproduct of coal, which is carbon dioxide. So inside of their calculations, again, like any industry, like the methane industry, like the fracking industry, they completely ignore the impact that their industry has upon the environment. So they say, hey, it's like nothing. Hey man, we just produce all this coal, this carbon dioxide goes up into the air.
And sulfur.
and sulfur goes up into the air. But it's okay. It's okay because there's the return for our investors. And this is again what we touched upon last week.
the entire business world is geared completely towards this return for investors without taking into account the actual cost of their business. And I find that mathematically flawed. I don't know. I'm not even a math whiz, and I find it mathematically flawed. How is it that you can develop a business model, a business concept, business idea, a business that basically goes around destroying the environment for the majority of the planet, destroys the Great Barrier Reef, is intending to wipe out fish populations, but somehow there is absolutely no feedback onto you as a result of having a pathetically destructive business like this? How is it that when you form your business model, you don't take into account the removal of the toxins that you produce as part of that same business model? So my thinking is that if there was one shift that we could do inside of the business world, it would for people to actually start to account for the impact that their business has on the environment, and to introduce steps that would first evaluate a business on that criteria, and then, assuming that it's an existing business, to alter their business model so that it does not have an impact. And this can be a tiny business, this can be a giant business. If you take a look at businesses that have no real kind of like, they're paper trail businesses like insurance, or like cell phone networks, or like whatever, like businesses that aren't really directly involved with mining or industry or destruction. I say that, but in the back of my mind, even as I said that, I forget about the volume of paper that the insurance industry is consumed. But forgetting about that for the moment, but it can involve things like how many employees they have and how those employees get to work. It can be involved with concepts like who they decide to sponsor. Why is it that they're sponsoring, why are they sponsoring concepts and ideas like horse shows? Like there's a horse show. Here we are in a planet that is in absolute state of destruction, and they're busy sponsoring horse shows. Your money that you think is going towards something decent is in fact just rolling out to be another nothing, another really nice horse show. And no offense to the horse show people, I'm sure their horse show is really important to them, but in reality, what's important now is changing the environment. It's changing the destruction to the environment and changing the way that we evaluate things. And this is my final point today, because I'm going to try not to go on too long, okay? But this is my final point today. I've been thinking quite a bit, and everywhere that I go, I sit down I sit down in a restaurant, I meet people, I talk to people, and I've noticed that there is a beautiful bleeding that happens as a result of my discussions, as a result of the information that I am doing. And I explained this a bit in my last kind of movie, where I told you that it's like you can see this kind of glossed over look in their eyes, and as you slowly start to give them the information, you're letting people know about like the absolute insanity that is happening around us right now, that we're not even watching, we're not even hearing the craziness that is going on around us. If they just took a minute to actually look at the madness that's going in the deoxygenated oceans, to the massive acidification that's happening, to the increasing carbon dioxide, to the melting glaciers, to the impact that as a species we're having on this planet, that you would bring about some change. You will bring about some change. You can see the light come on. I've had a person that I've been talking to frequently has all of a sudden started to share like information that we give them. They research it and they share it. They're putting it on their own Facebook profile. They're letting people know. They're spreading the word. And this comes to my final point. I'm sorry to return back to this twice, but there is a beautiful concept. It's called cognitive dissonance. And what that is it's the alteration, or it's having a duality. It's what I do is not what I say. It's having the contrast between my actions and my intentions, or it is basically the very thing that shapes all culture. It shapes society. It is the contrast between, I don't like this place where I am, I don't like this thing where I am, even though the majority rule sets it like this. It is that fight, that struggle that brings about revolution. It is that argument that we have amongst people that ultimately results in some change. And then when I go sit in a restaurant and I listen to the things that people are talking about, and I listen to the things that people are, like they're on their tiny little individualistic worlds, and I'm sure it's important to them. I'm not trying to say that they're all retards. I'm just saying that they're all retards. They're basically focusing their entire lives upon the things that are important to the individual. There are people that are talking about doing trips and going shopping, and although those things are important to those people, they are missing the real picture. People need to start talking about the environment. As I am talking to you, you need to talk to somebody else. There needs to be a revolution that happens within the culture of how we accept business, of how we accept the world around us. We cannot continue to destroy everything around us in favor of what? In favor of money, in favor of a larger company, in favor of shiny cars. We can't have this anymore. We can't. And the fact that we just think we can, and the media that we watch fools us into thinking that those things can still be done, but they can't. We already know that we're 15 years away from severe water restriction. 15 years. This isn't long. This isn't something, oh, but don't worry, in the future they'll fix it. This is something right now. Now, as a person, listen, the mere fact that you're watching this, the mere fact that you even took the time to watch this means that you and I are awake to it. And you need to start to play your role. You need to start to change the people around you. You need to start to communicate. You need to start to spread it. You need to, like a virus, inject your DNA into their mindset so that we are bringing about a change. That when we next sit in a restaurant, every person is only talking about it. And only then, once we've got an aggregate, a huge movement, a massive revolution that is happening, only then will we start to shape the planet around us. And the only way we're going to do it is by you watching me watching you, and us sharing the information. So I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my show. I hope I didn't go on too long, but please, I'll be pushing out another one probably Wednesday this week, bringing you up to date on all the news events that are happening. It's a beautiful day here in Cape Town, and I hope you're going to have a beautiful day wherever you are. Thank you, and enjoy your day.
Hello and good morning. Welcome to a quick interlude with Environmental News Network. We are sitting in the beautiful Constantia Valley, and frankly it's pouring like hell outside, so we're actually having to film inside. Yes, that said, it is still nasty and cold. We're doing a midweek one. We can see that it's already growing quite popularly over kind of, since we've been doing these. So we're going to do a little midweek one, just catch you up from early week stuff. So I'm going to cover 5 stories. One story I really love, man, I really love, and you will love this too. And it is so powerful in terms of what we should and what we shouldn't be doing. So the first story that I'm going to cover is just something that irritates the hell out of me. About 2 weeks ago on ENM we covered this farmer that went off and started poisoning carcasses so he could kill vultures, and and there was this whole knock-on effect about how he went and basically wiped out, I think it was 5 or 6 endangered Cape vultures. Well, now it turns out we've got another genius farmer, and don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to be negative or nasty about farmers, but frankly, I mean, they've got to start just working with nature just a little bit, and here we've got in the Namibian desert, there's a certain species of lion, and it's a normal lion in terms of its genus, but it's adapted specifically for the desert environment. It's got thicker skin, it retains water better, and there was basically a small pride of these lions that was in the Namibian desert, and one really big, beautiful male that was just recently shot by some idiot farmer, because maybe it took a cow, or it took a sheep, or it took some creature, but at the end of the day he's basically made those specific brand of desert lions completely extinct in that area. In fact, that was the last of the desert lions in that area. So for forever now, unless reintroduced from some other area, but forever, there will never ever ever in the history of the world be another lion going back into that area. They're gone, they're extinct. And this guy just shot the last one. So kudos to him. Thanks for destroying more of our beautiful cat species. You know, it irritates me. I hope it irritates you. It's time to let these farmers know that they've got to stop doing things like this. Norway is basically leading the pack in terms of ensuring that forests are protected, not only in Norway, but they're the first country in the world to officially ban not only deforestation within Norway, but in addition to it, all products that are linked to deforestation. And that's very interesting because they're not just attacking the area that's surrounding them. As you know, Norway's got beautiful natural forests. But in addition to it, they're banning the importing of any substances that are linked to deforestation. And this is a big first step. They're the first country to do this. So congratulations, Norway. They've done some amazing things before this. They contributed $1 billion to Brazil to restore rainforests. Just recently, they've contributed $250 million, $250 million to Guyana in relation to their reforestation efforts. These South American countries, they've got a lot of natural forests. Norway is playing a big part in ensuring that those forests remain natural. Then another story also linked to forests, because I actually love trees. I think we all love trees. Is what in California they just did a study. So this was in LA. They were basically doing an evaluation on how much so city urban species of kind of forests contribute. And when I say forest, I don't necessarily mean like build up clumps. I'm talking like the old trees that are lining the side of the road. And it was quite an interesting study because in as much as they say, look, in as much as like, a tree falls over and uproots the pavement, or, it drops leaves everywhere, people don't actually realize the value that trees are providing them. So I've had to jot this down because there was quite a few kind of values that trees gave, but I think it's important that we bring it up. We've got 10.32 million. So the total value of this, the estimated value of these trees was $1 billion. That was for all urban species, roadside species of trees in California, well, in this case in LA. They estimated that the trees were contributing to roughly $10.32 million of carbon sequestration, so removing carbon out the atmosphere. A very important one, specifically in places like LA, $18.15 million towards removing pollutants from the atmosphere. And so that's like your nasty things like smog and blah, blah, blah. Then another $41.5 million for retention of rainwater and keeping it cool enough so it actually allows the rainwater to come in. And then both maintaining kind of so leveling off the kind of temperature in LA, which was valued at $101 million. And then finally, and most importantly to anybody who has trees in their yard, they valued the total kind of amount that it contributes towards the value of your house at $834 million. And this basically summarized comes to about $1 billion, well, slightly over $1 billion. But it goes to show you how important those trees are, urban roadways, greening kind of programs that are running in various cities around the world. And more importantly, the value that it has to you as a tree owner in your property. You don't understand that a lot of people are actually buying places like this simply because of the trees, because it looks beautiful. And so I think it's very important that all of us keep that in our mind, and next time we have to rake up the leaves, just let's remember what those trees are actually doing for us, and more importantly, what they're really worth. So now I'm going to come to my last story, because I love this story. This is like a phenomenal story. If you only do one thing today, I really want you to share this one story. You sit down at a table, and you share this story, okay? This is so important. Because in about like 2 years ago, Chile was in a real power problem. Okay, they had no power, they had no kind of the electricity, so their grid was stressed, it was under massive strain. And they were facing soaring power costs. So as people in Chile, they were facing these massive power costs. and things were really rather miserable. And then the government was kind of split. Should we go nuclear or should we go renewable? And this was a big debate that raged inside of their parliament for a long period of time. And obviously, the usual kind of nuclear lobbies try to play their part and convince and bribe and corrupt, and the usual kind of stuff that goes around nuclear power, trying to convince people that it's still viable. But for some reason, Chile actually took another road. They said, hey, listen, you know what, we're going to go PV. And they started building off, I think it was 264 gigawatts of PV. PV is photovoltaic, so solar panels, solar modules, big solar farms. And they've got 15 primary suppliers of these big solar farms sitting around the country. And all of these farms basically feed and contribute directly into grid. And in a way, they liberated the grid. And this is an important phrase. I'm going to come back to this. Okay, this is an important phrase. But in a nutshell, what's really happened is they noticed in the first year of operation that they roughly got 119 days where the amount of energy consumed versus the amount that they were creating reached zero, meaning the value of that energy was zero. And so they, for 119 days of the first year of operation, they gave away electricity. It was free. Now we're sitting midway through this year. They're already on 194 days where they've basically achieved zero parity, meaning that they're producing more power than they are consuming. Now, this is important because it has massive impacts, considering that Chile is actually still in process of building another, I think it's 164 gigawatts of solar. So Chile will be, without question, outside of Germany, which sporadically goes to zero, Chile may be the first off-grid country entirely. And yes, they've solved the whole storage. Oh, you can't have solar panels because it can't be stored. They've solved it. It's solved. It's in operation. People are not paying for power. And that's the true beauty of renewable energy. Renewable energy is free. It's power from the sun. And it just comes out, and once you've achieved a zero parity, meaning that you're producing more than you're using, it's free. Costs you nothing. But the genius of the Chilean government here was to say, you know what, we're not going to retain that and still bill the clients. We're actually going to give it away. And they zeroed people's bills because that's the power of renewable energy. Now, the important thing here, and I wanted to come back to this, was having an open grid. You see, in South Africa, the country I live, they've given away a sole producer license to a company here called Eskom that is in so many backhanded, dirty deals to buy coal with various companies and planning crazy ass nuclear concepts because they are an ingrained kind of component of some sick system that used to be. In a way, Eskom has allowed us to feed back to grid, but it is not viable for a small consumer. You in your house, you can go off grid with your batteries, but you can't feed back into grid. And they do their own solar farms, but solely with the objective of charging people. Now, in a country like South Africa, where we have 1,600 kind of watts of energy per square meter, so we've got a great energy density here in South Africa, and places like Chile, it is so completely viable for us that we can actually get rid of our grid completely. But the first thing that has to happen is the political will behind it, is the urgency of people forcing the governments that be, the power providers that be, to free the grid. Let us put in our solar panels and push power back into the grid and leave us alone. Stop with these ridiculous concepts of how much little money that we've still got to pay. Because here in South Africa, they've got incentive schemes. They've got schemes where you still have to pay, because ultimately, as a municipality, as a city, as a country, they're trying not to lose the money. But they're forgetting that all the money that they have ultimately comes from the pocket of the consumer. And that money that we are not spending paying them for dirty power, we can rather be spending on the mass economy. It's a direct improvement to the economy, and the first step is the political will that drives it. And then, once you've got the political will, the brains to free the grid, allow people to push power back onto grid without any legislation outside of safety legislation, safety standards. So I'd like to say, please, if you could talk about this, if you could tell your friends about this, tell your friends what happened in Chile. That so far, for 194 days in Chile, nobody's had an electricity bill. Tell me you would not like that. Who wouldn't like that? Which company wouldn't like that? Which company that is sweating under power bills wouldn't love to get a zero electricity bill and a bit of bonus from not having to pay some centralized provider for dirty power? We can do this. We can make this happen, but it takes us talking about it and applying power. And that really is the summary of what I wanted to do for the week. But also, more importantly, it is also the principle of what ENN is. I would love to talk to people in Chile. If anyone in Chile is watching this, I'd love to do like a little interview with you. Hell, interview yourself. Send in your story. Let us hear what you got to say. Let us experience what it is like to be where you are. But more importantly, let us know. Let's start taking this conversation of how we can save this planet and how we can save money and how we can save lives ultimately and species if farmers stop shooting the things. But how we can put this all together and make a change in this planet. Together we can do this. Share this. Let us know if you're going to participate and join the conversation. I'd like to thank you for your time in watching ENN. I'm going to go back to my freezing kind of winter's day, but I hope wherever you are, you're having a great day, and thanks for watching. Hello and welcome to the Environmental News Network. We are filming from the lovely Constantia Valley with helicopters flying overhead, birds tweeting all around us, and I am basically going to cover some information that is deemed extremely important in terms of the environment, and it is actually extremely important. I mean, it's actually crazy important, but you sitting there in your house may or may not be aware of this. But it is actually so important that we've gone out of our way just to reiterate certain points of this. So the story actually starts a long time ago, but the part that I'm going to start with is the Great Barrier Reef, which was the first kind of point that it started becoming to everyone's attention. As some of you may or may not have heard, the Great Barrier Reef has been in slow decline over a period of time. And what is known as coral bleaching, which is basically this beautiful, lovely, luscious coral, it basically bleaches into this dull gray or dull white kind of shade due to lack of nutrients and ocean acidification. So a report was released roughly about 3 weeks ago, in which it's the most comprehensive study ever done on the reef, which they're saying that roughly 83% of the Great Barrier Reef is now dead. The question is whether or not, well, it's the top surface, remember that. The question is whether or not the Great Barrier Reef will be able to recover from such an event. And it is deemed extremely unlikely that the Great Barrier Reef is going to be able to recover. So as a result of this, people have taken some dramatic steps. They've basically gone and they're looking at doing things that neutralize the pH content of the top surface of the water in an attempt to basically remove the acidification problem that is causing the bleaching on the Great Barrier Reef. The problem really is, though, is that what's happening on the Great Barrier Reef is not a micro problem. So it's not a local problem. The problem that's happening on the Great Barrier Reef is actually a macro problem. And what that means is that there is no action that can be taken by any person in Australia, New Zealand, any of the surrounding islands. There is absolutely nothing that they can do about it, because what you are really witnessing is the impact of the macro event of climate change that is having a direct impact not only on the Great Barrier Reef, but on reefs all around the world. And what that means is that if you start looking at the kind of articles we've put out much news articles about this that's been published rather widely, and there is kind of social activists that are trying to start campaigns, save the Great Barrier Reef, save the Great Barrier Reef, all over Facebook, Twitter, and various other groups. But the reality is that there is absolutely nothing that can be done to save the Great Barrier Reef, because it's a macro problem caused by overall climate change. So the thinking behind the Great Barrier Reef, if you understand that it is like the heart of the ocean. I mean, there nowhere else in the world is such a diverse, large kind of place in the ocean found with such a density of life. So in a way, it's like the heart of the ocean. When you and I don't know how old you are, but when most of us, a lot of us, were born, the Great Barrier Reef was an abundant, beautiful place. And inside of our time, we're actually going to see the death of the heart of the ocean. And, no social activism is going to stop it. The only thing that is going to stop it is if we eventually kind of move away from this idea of climate change. But bearing in mind that 83% of the reef is already dead, the probability of us being able to stop it is almost zero. So then, sorry, I've just been corrected. It was 93% of the reef is dead. That's actually right. So then it brings us to another component. So now take that story and throw that story on one side of your mind, okay? And then it comes to another part of the story. Now they were looking, a study was recently done on what is causing ocean acidification. But while they were studying that, they were looking at oxygen levels inside of the ocean. Now there is a relationship between the volume of plankton that is present in the water and their ability to sequester carbon dioxide. The ocean, despite what you may have heard, is actually the largest sequesterer of carbon dioxide. And when I say sequester, I mean that it takes in carbon dioxide and releases oxygen. So the ocean is actually the largest, what we call a carbon sink. So it's bigger than the rainforest, bigger than any other arboreal forest, it's bigger than any thing that we have done. The ocean actually does most of the work. So most of the oxygen that you're breathing comes from the ocean. And I'm going to come to that point in a little bit. I'm just going to explain a bit about the dynamics of what's happening in the ocean. So basically plankton are responsible for bringing oxygen from the surface of the water, bringing carbon dioxide from the surface of the water, and they harness that as they keep the carbon, they release the oxygen. But because the top surface of the water has been heated, because of the amount of sunlight that is impacting on the ocean, the plankton are no longer able to reach the top surface of the water, and thus, even though they are still filtering some carbon dioxide that is resident, because that's what acidification is, it's an increase in carbon dioxide, it's mainly carbon that they're picking up, and there's less oxygen going around the ocean. So the report came out that basically said by 2030, you would start to see off all shores, or you would start to see obvious signs of lack of oxygen inside of the water. And there's another report that came out, but it's kind of minor by comparison, but it's still significantly important, is that the plankton is responsible for bringing that oxygen right from the top surface levels right to all the levels going down the marine chain as far as it can. And what this does is it enables a healthy marine environment where creatures are of all different kind of levels in the ocean are capable of eating or breathing. So with the loss of oxygen in the water, with the reduction in oxygen in the water, and with the growing kind of losses of oxygen in the water, the impact on marine life is projected to be devastating. Devastating. So what you're talking about is the loss of massive marine chains. So where you and I now can walk into the store and pick up like fish, a large proportion of those fish are they're dying. They're dying. So because they're just dying of suffocation, there is nothing for them to actually breathe. So the impacts, the knock-on effect impacts that this has is dramatic. So now if you take that and put that in the side as well, along with our little story about the Great Barrier Reef, what you're left with is an interesting little study that's been done, and something that we've actually here at Brave Green World, we've been monitoring for quite some time. In fact, it was a question that was raised a while back. When you were in school, you got taught, so you said like how much oxygen is actually in the atmosphere, okay? So the common phrase that we throw around is 21%. 21% of oxygen is available in the atmosphere, which means that for every breath that you take, you're taking in some helium, some argon, some oxygen, but of that, 21% is actually oxygen. Now, if you understand the fundamentals of climate change, what they're saying is that there's an increase in carbon dioxide. So from combustion, like we're burning carbon, from kind of exhaust, carbon monoxide. So from all of these things, there is a combustion process that's taking. It's what's called oxidization, which means that in order to release carbon in the form of smoke or byproduct, it has to attach itself to an oxygen so that it becomes lighter and it floats up. So that's how you get carbon dioxide, which means that there's a direct mathematical relationship between the volume of carbon dioxide versus the volume of oxygen. So some studies were done about this, because what we wanted to find out was, what is the actual oxygen? You can't have an increase in carbon dioxide without having a corresponding decrease in oxygen. So we wanted to see what studies were done in relation to the amount of atmospheric oxygen that's available. And so far, the results are kind of sketchy. Scientists actually blatantly stated in the document that they just don't know. So they've done some recordings. Some cities, they've picked up oxygen contents as low as 14%, some as low as 17%. And these are just patches. If you imagine patches floating around above cities that are deoxygenated. And now you can see it all starts to make sense. Inside of your ocean, you're now getting patches of loss of oxygen. Inside of your atmosphere, you're getting loss of oxygen. And those same losses of oxygen are starting to have an impact on the marine ecosystem, which is in turn having an impact on what you're seeing in the Great Barrier Reef. And so, or for the first time actually, all the little pieces of a puzzle are starting to coalesce into one big story. And that story is happening right now. Right now, as I say this, it's happening. And what are you and I really capable of doing about it? Nothing. What are you and I capable of bringing about some kind of change that will affect it? We are powerful. But this has got to be bigger than some social media campaign. This has got to be a fundamental change in the way that we're going about doing business. What it means is that there's greater level of sunlight that is hitting the ocean. The ocean is absorbing more heat because all it is really energy transfer. So there is more energy inside of our atmospheric system than there is outside of our atmospheric system. And what that does is it starts to heat up the top surface of the water. And because the top surface of water begins to heat up, what it really does is anything. It's the same thing that happens with any water. If you heat up water, it expands. As there's more energy absorbed by the ocean, there's lower oxygen inside of the ocean. There's greater ocean acidification, which is reducing plankton. And ultimately, it is now starting to have an impact not only on marine-based kind of oxygen levels, but also on atmospheric-based oxygen levels. And this is a story that is actually more serious than anything you're going to hear. It's more serious than anything that you're going to read. It's more serious than anything that you're actually going to uncover this week. And you can put it in your head, you can do what you like with it. But the fact is that if you take a look, and I'm just going to reiterate why ENN is actually important. If you look at what the news was covering inside of this week, we covered things on CNN like Trump. We covered a whole lot of rubbish that's related to events on the field. But why is nobody talking about this? Because this, in your lifetime, no longer is it 2100, the fame, this is when we'll see the effects of climate change. We're talking something that is only 14 years away before you are going to see significant changes in the oxygen content of the surface of the ocean, and thus it's going to impact those that eat seafood. It's going to impact the entire marine chain, and it's going to impact oxygen levels. And when scientists were asked, what happens if the oxygen levels get to a low point? What is the net effect? What is the safety level for human beings? You know what they said? They don't know. They don't know. Now think about that. Just put that in the back of your head. Remember, for all of you that are going to be watching Donald Trump go on and attack Hillary Clinton, and you're going to watch Bernie Sanders try climb all over Clinton, and how important that is, the reality is that day by day, the oxygen content of this atmosphere that you're relying on to watch those things is actually running out. So I want to thank you for your time in watching ENN. Remember that this is the channel that is going to bring you actual news, real news that's actually important to you and actually has meaning to not only you but everybody else on Earth. ENN is the one channel where you're going to actually find out the things that are important. So thank you for watching and enjoy the rest of your day. Hello and good morning, and welcome to the Mother Channel, the channel that brings you news, documentaries, and interviews about cutting-edge climate change information, and today, overfishing and the problems with overfishing. First, I'm going to go through a couple of stories that happened this week. It's a big story actually, and it's been slowly coming out over the last, say, 2-3 months. The first reports came out that had to do with the slow repair that's been happening to the ozone as a result of man stopping to use CFCs in refrigerants, primarily refrigerants, but also in other devices. CFCs, as you know, was used as a refrigerant back in the early 19th century. Ironically, the inventor who claimed the gas, which he called Freon, he actually killed himself through one of his own kind of poorly put together experiments. So it's kind of ironic considering the amount of death that he's caused others as well as a result of his experiments. So in relation to Freon gas, he manufactured Freon gas. Freon gas was utilized as a primary source of refrigerant for a long period of time, unbeknownst to him, and ironically, unbeknownst to everybody else. The CFCs that were in the Freon gas were destroying the ozone layer, and for a long time everyone was talking about the ozone and its effect that it was having upon people. You know, you couldn't go to the beach and suntan any longer because the amount of infrared rays were just frying people. The rise in skin cancer cases also corresponded to it. But for the last couple of months, there's been some good news emerging relating to the ozone hole that was originally there, and that it's repairing itself. And not only is it repairing itself, but to such an extent that for the first time it is noticeable above the Antarctic. The Antarctic has actually been driven into a period of local cooling as a result of the repair of the ozone above it. And this is actually some good news that's coming out on this front of climate change for a while. And that cooling is also going to obviously have a greater impact in terms of glacial growth. And ironically, it will also reflect a lot more sunlight, which in turn will bring down the overall temperature for the region. But we have to piggyback that with some bad news that came out. There was a study that was done recently upon the impact that the huge forests above the 41-degree latitude, expanding across the North American continent all the way through to Asia, and their impact in terms of how they regulated carbon dioxide. And so generally it was previously thought that these forests are responsible for between 25 to 30% of the sequestration of all carbon dioxide that was in the atmosphere. However, the study has recently found that if you consider the growth rates now of these forest species, if you're going to sequestrate, let's call it, just for argument's sake, 1,000 metric tons of carbon out of the atmosphere, there needs to also be a corresponding growth of carbon inside of the tree species. Now, for the first time, it's actually been calculated that there isn't a corresponding growth between the amount of carbon that is being sequestrated and the increase in scale or size of the tree species, which means that that percentage that we had always accounted for those forests doing is actually probably a lot lower. No specific percentage was reflected that showed what the new change is, but there you have it. I'm now going to cover a topic that I love. I love this topic, okay? Because I love to fish. I'm a great fisher person, although I never catch anything. My daughter continually hammers me for the fact that I never seem to catch fishing, although I go out fishing quite a lot. For me, it's really about floating around in a boat with some people and having a good time. It has very little to do with the actual catching of fish. And considering I don't actually eat fish, it's for me, I catch it and I throw it back. So I'm going to start by setting some parameters on this conversation based on the kind of report backs that I have on my previous conversation. I have to be very careful about my wording, because as soon as I say scientist, people seem to get into an uproar about how figures are lost and how everything's, there's just this pathetic backlash that I get from scientists. I find it also, interestingly enough, quite ironic that we accept what scientists say about things like light or photons, but we cannot accept what they say when it comes to things like global climate change. Really quite funny. So, to get back to the point, when I talk about overfishing, this is the parameter that I want to set. I'm not talking about a guy getting on his boat and going out with a couple of friends and catching a fish. I'm talking about the commercial viability, so commercial fishing. To give you an extent of the scale of what's happening in overfishing, 85% of all fishing species are completely depleted, overexploited, endangered, or near extinction. That's 85%. The world consumes roughly 17.4 kilograms of fish per capita per year. Now, this has climbed dramatically. In 1960s, the world was consuming 9.4 kilograms of fish per capita per year. But now, we're actually consuming 17.4 kilograms. Now, this is actually interesting because if you consider just the math, so you don't have to be a mathematician to understand this, if the world is operating at 17.4 kilograms of fish per person, that means that every year 121,360,000 metric tons of fish need to be taken out the ocean in order to satisfy the protein cravings of the world. Another interesting point is that even though the kind of East, if you want to call it the East, the Europe, that kind of body, the fish consumption level has remained fairly consistent. The primary driver of this overexploitation is China. China's growth and its dependence on fish as a source of protein sees China's per capita of fish eating climb to roughly 24.6 kilograms per capita in China. And if you consider the growth generally of those regions, China, India, Malaysia, those rapid growing populations, all you're doing is seeing an absolute decimation of fish stocks around the world. Currently, it's estimated that there's roughly 2,270 species of fish that are now on the endangered list. This is a dramatic, stark contrast to how it was in the 1950s. In fact, you could actually take it quite a way further than that. But you could go back to, say, the early 19th century or the late 18th century, where there was such an abundance of fish that they used to take crayfish, or what you call lobster. They used to take lobster out and give it to the poor in times of famine or in times of food shortages. It was considered a poor man's meal to take these big crayfish out. Of course, now everyone goes nuts about lobsters and crayfish. And ironically, the producer of this show, now this is a great example, about 3 years ago, took our government to court over the set levels that they put on taking crayfish or lobster out of the ocean. In this case, it was the West Coast rock lobster. She basically argued, stating that their science in terms of estimating how much lobster there was left was flawed. And as a result, until such a time that they had actually quantified how much lobster is left, they should put a cessation order on all lobster harvest from around the coast. Now, of course, this was shot to pieces. She got met by a barrage of attorneys that basically counter-argued her and beat her into submission. But then, I find it so funny that 3 years later, here, 2016, what appears on our endangered list? The West Coast rock lobster. It is now nearing a point of extinction, which is exactly as she mentioned roughly 3 years ago. Another point that's going to shake up this country, for argument's sake, is that there is the famous story of the great white sharks that breach the water in a beautiful kind of cascade as they go after seals and smash back into the water. It's considered that in South Africa we are the only kind of area in which the sharks do this breaching. It's become almost iconic when you come visit Cape Town or the Western Cape that you go and watch shark kind of diving and you go and watch the odd breach, and people love this. Now, it's inside of this week, a report came out showing that the great white shark is nearing extinction in all South African coastal waters. Now, why is that? Why is the great white shark nearing extinction? Do you think it's because we eat shark here? It's not because we eat shark here. It's because the Chinese market, not only the Chinese market, the Asian market has an appetite for shark fin soup and byproducts of shark fin, which means that they catch the shark, they cut off its fin and throw the living carcass back into the water to die a disgustingly horrifying death. And this is happening every single day in every single ocean all around the world. In fact, it is estimated that roughly 60% of all top chain ocean predators are now nearing the point of extinction. 93% of all top chain ocean predators, and I'm not just referring to shark, I'm referring to bluefin tuna and kind of meat-eating predatory fish, is extinct in the North Atlantic and the North Sea. Now, what does that mean? What do these people do? They previously harvested these catches in these waters. What have they done? They've gone over to West Africa, where they've started overfishing in West Africa. It is estimated that 25 nautical miles off the coast of Mauritania, there are so many lights it almost looks like a runway when viewed from the shore. And what's going to happen in West Africa? Overexploitation of all commercial stock species. They estimate that it can maybe make it until about 2050 before the entire ocean around West Africa is depleted and extinct. And where does this also ring a little bell for us? A little story that we covered maybe about, 4 weeks ago, where we were talking about the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean now is actually considered a desert. There is vast tracts of the Mediterranean that are so overexploited that there is nothing left. They are actually completely vacant of any living life form outside of moss, the odd growing piece of seaweed, and all around the coast, even though you and your friend can get in a boat and still catch a fish, there is no longer any commercial viability to fishing in the Mediterranean. It's dead, it's over. And it's going to happen to every place around the world. And why? Because it's estimated that we are taking out 2 to 3 times more fish than the ocean is able to produce. So consider this. The ocean, once the most viable biodiversity of all life on this planet, in fact, it is still considered the most viable diversity of all life on this planet. But we are making it so rapidly, we're thrashing it into a state of extinction. So for you and me that go out and float on a boat and don't expect to catch fish, this is okay news. But for the rest of the world that rely on fish for their protein, and not only protein, but they rely on fish to harvest as their primary food source and harvest as a means of earning income. Already they estimate 15,000 jobs are going to be lost this year just due to the fact that there is no more fish. In Peru, they used to have rich coastal waters full of anchovies. In the 1980s, was the first kind of indication that Peru's waters were depleted of all anchovies found near deep surface or around any kind of coastal area. And what's happened now? The entire anchovy market is completely collapsed in Peru. The bluefin tuna and the yellowfin tuna are now where before you could pick up the odd one in the North Sea. They are now nearing such a point of extinction that it's actually allowed the growth for a whole lot of smaller subspecies. The whole food chain has actually been shocked into a completely different kind of structure now. Where before you could expect your top ocean predators to take care of overpopulation of things like sardines, etc., etc., it is now gone. The cod, which used to be caught off the northern parts of the UK, is also now extinct, practically extinct. It is no longer viable to fish for cod in those areas. So this is just giving you a little sample of the kind of events and news that are happening. I'm going to cover one more thing because I think this is kind of ill, if you ask me, okay? There is a problem in terms of controlling the law in the ocean. In the open ocean, there is no law. No country owns kind of certain territorial, they've got territorial boundaries, but outside of those boundaries, nobody owns it. So what fishing companies have taken to doing, and very effectively, is that instead of where they would send out a fishing vessel beyond 25 degrees nautical, plow their fish, bring it back into the harbor, process those fish, send those fish to market, they now put out what they call big ocean vessels, so like a centralized vessel. They don't even come back in for months at a time. Hello and good morning and welcome to Mother Channel. My name is Jason Soul, reporting for the ENN Network. It's a beautiful Sunday. Going to cover some stories that came out this week, but there's actually been some really nice summary stories that came out this week. On Friday I released a video update that was relating to the basic mechanics of climate change. We received a lot of very positive support from that. We also received some negative kind of feedback from people that are clearly deniers of climate change, or rather non-believers in the concept of climate change. I tried my best in the previous update to kind of bring them into a state of reality. So I'm going to address today, first of all, some of the news, and maybe you've heard it or maybe you haven't, but I urge you to check it out for yourself. I'd like to challenge anybody watching this movie, go onto Google and Google extreme weather news, and you will find out for yourself exactly what sort of extreme weather, which always is the frontal kind of shift in a varying climate, but go Google extreme weather, see for yourself what is happening all over the world. The events are simply catastrophic. California is in its longest drought that it's ever had, to the point of where, you know, so far 66 million trees have been reported as dying. You know, these trees, obviously they become a fire hazard. You've already seen the raging fires that are going on inside of California, and in specific in the Sierra Nevada. In addition to this, in Phoenix, an aeroplane couldn't land because the tarmac was actually starting to melt due to extreme temperatures that were being experienced in Sierra Nevada, all across the United States, all across, you know, India, most of Asia, here in Southern Africa. You had temperatures reaching over 50 degrees and above. This is, you know, almost a continued kind of problem, month in and month out. In Karachi in Pakistan, they're experiencing such water shortages that the intensity of what's going on there is actually forced for the first emergence of what we're going to call climate refugees. These are people that are fleeing a certain area because the climate has shifted so dramatically for so long that they are no longer able to exist in a previously known area of existing, in this case Karachi, Pakistan. They're saying that it's applying massive political pressure, it's applying massive human misery. In Ethiopia, they're back to having one of the longest droughts they've ever had in 50 years. This is also implied in terms of famine. The tornado season is just warming up in the United States, but for the first time China starts experiencing tornadoes. Tornadoes are being experiencing earlier and earlier, almost year on year, every single month, for the last year and a half, a new climate record has been broken almost everywhere in the world. Most of Europe has been experiencing flood after flood after flood. It's becoming like the new normal. And yet you still have people that run around thinking, hey, well, you know, we can be okay like this. We can carry on doing exactly what we do and be okay like this. Well, I got some news for you. I mean, you know, Einstein once said that the moment that bees die off, that within the space of 5 years, most humans will die off too. And I'm not sure of the exact phrasing, was actually something similar to that. And the reason why he said that is because bees are a corner key species, meaning that their pollination ability is it's unbeatable. The bees pollinate more flowers than almost any other living species. With the loss of bees, you lose the pollination. Now, a new report coming out trying to first of all find out why all those bees are dying all over the world, because bees are dying all over the world. But they also seem unable to locate their food source, their pollination source. And it has just been shown that they're failing to find their pollination source simply due to the volume of air pollution that is in the atmosphere. Bees are the tiny micropollutants that are associated with carbon monoxide have had such an extreme reaction to bees that it is confusing them. They're unable to smell where they're going, they're unable to signal to the rest of the hive where to find the pollen, and this is causing a mass dieback in terms of bees. On top of this, then you have the added kind of negative that comes from Monsanto's drive towards nicotine-based kind of fertilizer, nicotine-based pest control, and the impact that it's had on bees. In many countries around the world, it's been made illegal, so you're no longer allowed to use nicotine-based kind of pesticides on crops. But still, the impact that it had on the bees as a species is dramatic and huge. Now, mussels, which is a common kind of food dish that people have from all over the world, it has now just been shown that due to the increasing acidity of the water, due to the increasing temperature of the water, that mussels will likely be off the menu of the world within 85 years. Now, that may seem like a long period of time, but understand, it doesn't, you have mussels, you have mussels, you have mussels every single day up until 85 years, in which case they dramatically fall off. It is a slow deterioration of mussels all around the world until you get to the point that it is no longer commercially viable to actually harvest mussels for the table because it's just too expensive. So I want you to consider something now. If you look at it, you've got all of these extreme kind of events that are happening. But you're not hearing about it on any other channel. I mean, you hear about it on my channel, but you're not hearing about it on any other channel. You hear every now and then, hey, there was a flood there, or hey, there's a raging wildfire there. But the fact is that something is happening. Now, it just happens that it corresponds with an increase in global temperatures. News reports that came out saying that we're no longer able to keep the global temperature between 1.5 to 2 degrees. This is serious news. It's serious. But it was never reported anywhere else. It's basically reported here and to those scientists that actually took the time to go ahead and read it. And so I wondered to myself, why? Like, why is it that it's not covered? Why? What is the problem here? And then I remember a couple of words that my producer doesn't really want me to talk about, but I think I'm going to just use it anyway. And that is that a lot of people seem to think one of three things. First of all, that climate change is somehow a hoax. That climate change was some kind of fraud perpetuated by Al Gore. And third, that climate change is some kind of means of taxing the population. It's a means of further redistributing wealth, your wealth, to the rest of the population. And so I want to be honest with you. There's only one real fraud or hoax going on here. And that is the fraud that we still believe we can keep polluting. We can keep running around with oil-based and carbon-based kind of fuel sources and keep polluting, and it's going to have zero effect. And if you consider it, when you watch anything, you know, whether it's Al Jazeera or whether it's CNN or anything else for that matter, you're not going to get told that, hey, you know, what you're doing here, this big industry that's worth multi-billions and trillions of dollars, these Saudi princes that drive around merely because they found oil below the ground, do you honestly think they are going to allow national mainstream media to report on the fact that their product, their wealth is derived from the destruction of your environmental future? Do you really think that's going to happen? Of course it's not going to happen. Is that a fraud? I've never in my life heard of a more clear-cut case of fraud. Is it a hoax? It is a hoax for us to believe that we can actually carry on doing this. We cannot carry on doing this. We cannot carry on destroying the planet and thinking there is, you know, absolutely zero effect that is going to happen to us. Because it is definitely going to happen. And if you just start Googling, spend a bit of time actually researching before trolling people that actually have been researching, go out and find out for yourself. Read it up for yourself. We're not making it up here on it because nobody else seems capable of doing it. Now, another concept that I've also been thinking about is that a lot of people seem kind of afraid of the idea of what it means to be environmentally sane. And this will address that final point that I made in terms of whether or not it's some kind of wealth redistribution program or some kind of hoax perpetuated by the government to further tax you further. I'm going to give you a picture of what the world could potentially be. Okay? And it's you know, for some of you it's going to be like, oh no, it's a hoax. It's not a hoax. The world is actually not a bad place. People seem to have the concept that somehow, merely because we want things to be done environmentally, that your world is going to change. You've got to go put feathers and shells in your hair, and that everyone's got to go get bongo drums, and they've got to go sit and watch the sun go down while chanting and playing their bongo drums on the beach. And nothing can be further from the truth. What we are referring to here is a variation in the way that business is done. A variation in the way that you are done. You see, my concept for you is very difficult for a lot of very ignorant people to swallow. It's very difficult. And there's a lot of ignorant people out there that would prefer to believe really lame concepts. So I realized quite some time ago, almost 14 years ago, that it was impossible for me to change their minds. Ignorance is bliss in the truest sense of the word. They will run around blissfully denying everything, but the fact of the matter is that they're flawed, they're wrong. And I don't have to change their mind, and neither do you when you talk to them. The reality of what we're trying to do here is about changing the environment around people and not trying to change the person. And what does that mean? It means this. Let's evaluate business based upon the actual result set of that business. Let's take a company. So for argument's sake, I'm going to talk about coal in this instance, which is it's an easy target. So you've got a guy, he's got a coal mine, or he's gone and found a source where coal maybe can be found, okay? And what he does is he will then go and do all these geographic kind of surveys. He will establish the how big the vein is, and he will go and he will develop a business plan. He'll present that business plan to coal mining companies. The coal mining companies will assess that business plan based upon the viability of the extraction of that coal and the distribution of that coal into the marketplace and the wealth that can be accumulated from that. And for years, they can operate with a business model like this. Is it such a bad, crazy shift of idea? Is it so scary that we expect that a company that's primary business is polluting our atmosphere to have some kind of impact for polluting the atmosphere, for correcting the atmosphere? And as I said to somebody this morning, I said, you know what? It's not about another rubbish tax, that the government's just going to tax you and they're going to take money from these companies and nothing ever happens from it. The government will just put that tax money into their coffers and they'll sit back and give each other raises and have a nice day. It cannot be in that model. It has to be in a model in which the actual result sets of that company, the funds that come from that company, are driven directly towards cleaning up their product. Is that such a bad thing, that a company is actually responsible for the byproduct of their product? Is it such a bad thing that a company evaluates the viability of a business based on the ability to destroy the environment for not only them, but the entire world population around them? Is that so bad? Is it so difficult to do? Take a look at electricity. A lot of people they spoke about things, the whole green movement is really just about taxing us further so that they can build up these power stations and these renewable stations and increase the cost of our electricity to offset the money that they've spent on renewable energy. And in a way, they are 100% right. They are 100% right. Most countries, including my own country, are going to do that. They are going to build up these massive solar plants and they're going to keep billing people. You will keep paying. There will be no direct benefit, implied or inferred benefit, that is given to you. Can you pause quick? Okay, so my apologies, we were interrupted. I was talking about electricity. A lot of people seem to suspect that what will happen is the government after making people pay extra for their electricity for putting up these big, beautiful, either wind farms or concentrated solar farms or solar, just general photovoltaic solar farms, that the government will keep charging them and increase their taxation merely due to the government's kind of role in wanting to be green and wanting to offset emissions. Now, albeit that the government needs to offset their emissions, and albeit that it is part of their role towards controlling emissions, so moving from a coal-fired power source into a renewable source, this is all really good and well. But it is dangerous for the people that are already struggling with high power bills. So what is the fix to this? Well, we've already seen the fix to this, and there's no reason why this fix shouldn't be done everywhere in the world. Here in South Africa, that we have exactly the same problem, okay? Our government wants to put up solar farms. In fact, our government has put up solar farms. And yes, they bought those solar farms from big, European countries for a far greater rate than what is probably required. And yes, even though we have these giant solar farms or big solar farms, no benefit or direct for the actual consumer of that power is received in any way. In fact, if anything, the price of our power has increased, and this is a fear that is happening all around the world. Again, back here in South Africa, our government then takes a look at its means of resolving this, and so what they do is they propose some trillion rand, and it's a rand for us, but trillion rand nuclear plants, which is actually insane. First of all, nuclear just takes forever to erect. It takes forever. There is never yet. In fact, I will be challenged. I challenge you to find me a single example of a single nuclear plant that is A, being delivered on time, and B, being delivered on cost, which means that the actual implied cost of what they're being offered is never realized at the end of the project. So, that's pretty much it for nuclear. If you consider how long it takes to put up nuclear, if you consider the amount of effort and energy that goes into just mining the uranium for nuclear, and then basically utilize that nuclear in terms of generating energy, and then the disposal of that kind of nuclear waste. I mean, it's a crazy concept. We're splitting an atom to boil water. That's essentially what we're doing. We're flash boiling water, and we're basically driving turbines. But to come back to my point, the problem here has nothing to do with what the government does. The problem has to do with us. The government is under the illusion that they somehow own our grid, where nothing can be further from the truth. The grid belongs to the people. It does not belong to the government. All the infrastructure, installations, coal-fired plants, nuclear-fired plants, any means of generating electricity does not belong to the government. They are merely a short-term custodian of that facility. So the reality is that should the government then say, listen, I tell you what, instead of us continuing to build these ridiculously overpriced kind of nuclear plants, these ridiculously overpriced coal plants, what we're going to do is we're going to roll out renewable energy. And sure, renewable energy, if you go wind turbines, it requires a certain geographic location. There has to be wind. If you're putting up solar farms, obviously, it's got to be an area that's got a good solar energy density. But the reality is, and here's the trick is to ensure that the population receives the benefit of the free power. The government is no longer, once the farm is built and once it's maybe 2 years, 3 years, recovered the cost of that farm, the government should give the power to the people. It should. It should, because it's not costing them anything. They maybe have to run around every now and then and do a little cleanup. The power, the benefit of free energy needs to be given to the people, and it has been given to the people in some countries. In Chile, in Portugal, in Germany. In fact, in Germany, they make so much power, they actually had to pay people to utilize power. So the reality is that it's very much a viable concept. First assess business based on their direct impacts, then join a network of people and force the government to give us what is rightfully ours. If we put up solar and the power is free, give us our free power. And you see, the problem that government has, and I understand this as a problem, is that they make a lot of money from generating electricity for the grid. They make a lot of money. And in their minds, they fear the fact that by giving up that money, that they somehow are operating to the detriment of all the people that they've got employed. But the reality of what they're missing here is that companies and consumers that have had the benefit of that not paying that electricity in their pocket ultimately spend that same money within that economy, which means that there is additional taxation, first of all, on the spend. There is a greater opportunity for entrepreneurship for people that are selling services into the economy, and there's more wealth. Companies that are already struggling, people that are struggling, they can't afford electricity, are all of a sudden given the opportunity to have free electricity. And is this a hard concept? Is this a dangerous concept? Is this something that we need to be afraid of? I don't think so. If you take a look at food now, for argument's sake, so let's look at food. At the moment, you've got a whole lot of subsidized farms. And I'm not going to go into the whole political rubbish in relation to farmers' subsidies, etc. What I'm talking about is the viability of a farm. Now let's say that I'm able to grow something and I'm able to use very little water, but I have to use a hell of a lot of chemicals in order to make that thing grow. And I do that. Or I've genetically engineered this kind of seed to make that thing grow. And then the thing grows, okay? And then that food that gets harvested from that gets put on your table, and it gets put on your table at a cheap cost, okay? But the chemicals that they used in order to achieve that growth, they get washed away into the water system, where some of them never, ever biodegrade. And for argument's sake, most are like a huge water aquifers that become absolutely polluted, and to the point that you're no longer able to drink it. So even though you're sitting there buying your cheap product, your cheap piece of veggie, your big oversized kind of cabbage, whatever you gets your thing going, the reality is that the cost of the production of that is damaging to the environment for everybody. For everybody. And now, so I could understand, look, if there's no other way, we've got to feed like 7 billion or 7.4 billion people. There's no other way, but there is. And the alternative to that is not advanced, it's not complex, it's extremely simple, and not only is it beneficial for people's health, but it actually is beneficial for absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and that's a simple organic principle of farming. Why is it that it's so easy for somebody that's going to grow with Monsanto, or somebody that's going to, destroy a huge segment of the desert with and putting crops there where crops shouldn't be, and draw water from an aquifer where it shouldn't be drawn, and use chemicals to keep it alive against pests? Why is it that he's easily able to obtain financing, easily able to get his product to market, yet somebody who is actually doing something beneficial, A, for the environment, B, for your health, because there's more nutrients inside of vegetables that are derived from an organic process. There's more benefit in terms of carbon sequestration from the atmosphere by keeping the microbes in the soil. There's more benefit from not having chemicals flushed away into our water system, ultimately ending up in the sea. There is only benefit. Why is it such a hard concept? Do you have to go put a shell in your hair? Do you have to go beat drums on the beach? No. You just merely have to do something that you're doing anyway, but just from a healthy perspective. Healthy not just for you, but healthy for the environment. Why is it that we keep thinking we can't have these things in a green economy? Why? It's madness. Then take a look at meat, for argument's sake. Okay, so we know something about meat. Okay, meat is delicious for those people that love meat. Okay, there's a lot of people that don't like meat. I personally like meat. But the fact is, do I have to stop eating meat now because I want to have a green economy? No. You don't have to stop eating meat. You can keep eating meat. The objective here is just to eat less. It's better for you anyway. It's healthier for you not to consume meat every day, and it's phenomenal for the environment. It's an incredible thing. And I'm not saying, hey, look, man, you can't have meat every day. You can have meat twice a week. Yeah, well, why do you have to have meat every day? It's just making you fat. It's not good for you, and more importantly, it's not good for the environment. Is such a shift going to be problematic that a green economy wants you to be healthy? Is that such a crazy idea that all these mechanisms, first of all judging a business, first of all putting in an electrical source that the benefit is given back to the people, first of all changing a farming area to the type rather or methodology to something that is good for you and good for the environment. Changing over to eating less meat that is also good for you and good for the environment. Is that so painful? Do we really have to have these ongoing insane debates about whether or not it's all some government fraud trying to take money from you? It isn't. It's just about doing something with your head. It's about conquering ignorance and taking a look at what possibilities there are as an alternative. I'll give you a good example here, and I've done this before. Let's imagine that you're a firm believer in no climate change, okay? Like climate change is all like a big lie and blah, blah, blah. All right. So I can't change your mind because you're just entrenched with the concept. You're just desperate to believe that everything is fine, despite all news to the contrary. You're desperate to believe it. So let's say I don't change your mind. Let's say that we just shifted to the first example, okay? Where we're assessing a business based upon its green ability, its ability to clean up its own mess. So let's take a shopping complex for argument's sake. So inside of a shopping complex, person comes to the checkout, doesn't have any bags with him because he doesn't give a flying toss about the environment. So he picks up his package, shoves it in, puts it in the back of his car, and off he goes. Now, if we said to a shopping mall, if we said to shopping chains, we said, now listen, I understand that you have a need to providing plastic bags or plastic carrier bags for people, but we're going to tax you for it. Okay, and that tax is actually going to go towards investing in PET, which is biodegradable plastic, and that biodegradable plastic will be put inside of your store, and that's what you're going to have to do from that moment on. Instead of where you're able to buy these cheap oil-based bags, you're going to have to spend 10 cents more buying a biodegradable bag. Now, to the consumer, that guy that doesn't believe in climate change or anything else, to that consumer, there's no difference to him. There's no difference. He walks into the store, packs his stuff, throws his mess up into the air, does whatever he likes. But at the end of the day, I've changed that consumer merely by changing the environment around him. And all of these structures put in place for almost anything. Take a look at any packaging. What happens if we enforced a packaging shift based on its ability to biodegrade and the impact that would have not only on our oceans, where it's been widely reported about the microplastics that are in the water, retarding fish growth, destroying, vast tracts of ocean. I mean, why is it so bad to consider a concept in which we're actually responsible for our actions? Is that really that hard? Is it really that difficult? Don't think so. So I'd like you to, instead of approaching this movie or this clip or this interview that we did, or approaching last week's interview, instead of try and think about what you can do. Try and think about a new way for you to do something. And that doesn't mean, hey, I'm going to change it here myself and it makes no difference if everyone else changes. In a way, you're right. We need to make a wide change. And the only way we're going to get a wide change is when everybody is talking about it and everybody is deciding that is important. Think about it. In the US politics, as of today, we've only got Hillary and we've got Trump, okay? So Bernie is long gone, he's dead. When was the last time that we heard anything about the environment outside of Trump saying that he's basically going to cancel pretty much anything environmental that Obama has done? But when have we heard about it? Why not? And you know why not? It's because nobody's talking about it. And you know why no one's talking about it? Because right now, after watching this, I challenge you. Go switch on CNN, go switch on Al Jazeera, switch to any news channel you like. Tell me if you find anything that is related to the destruction that we are doing to this planet. It is possible that we can bring about a change, but that change comes from us, and it comes from you watching this, and it comes from us sharing it, comes from us talking about it, and it comes from us driving those people, those weirdos that drive around in the BMWs, that make decisions. It comes from them going, hey, these people are worried about the environment, and therefore in my speech that I give up kissing little babies and saying great things about myself, I'm going to start to say things like, I agree. We should make electricity free for people. We should put up PV and the benefits of that PV given back to people. We should make organic farming because it's good. And the moment that you have that synchronicity, that connection between the mass populace that is concerned and worried about what's going to happen to the planet, to the idiots that are basically making the decisions, all of a sudden you have change. And that change comes from you sharing my information, I'm sharing your information, and us talking about it. Talk about it. Talk about it to everybody that you know. You'll get a lot of people that will be ignorant fools, but talk about it. So I want to thank you for your time. It's a beautiful day here in Cape Town, and I hope it's a beautiful day wherever you are. And thank you for watching, and I look forward to hearing from you soon. Thanks. Hello and welcome to the Mother Channel. My name is Jason Saul. I'm reporting for the ENN Network, which is the Environmental News Network. Today we are going to do a big topic. A lot of people have been talking about this in a lot of the updates that we've been doing. Today we're basically covering the beauties and the truths behind a concept that has such dramatic impact for you, it's actually quite terrifying. It's about free power. Free electricity. And is it possible? Is it possible to have free electricity? To a certain extent, I've had a lot of criticism based around the use of basically renewable technologies versus those of fossil fuels. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dip into a bit of the realities behind the current kind of crisis behind electricity power costs and the ongoing impacts that it has for your life and for us from the Mother Channel, more importantly the environment and overall in terms of climate. So I'm going to start with a little bit of the background. Basically at present we have roughly 7.4 billion people on the planet. 7.4 billion. Every year, this grows by roughly 75 million. Despite some traumatic event, it's going to skyrocket. Now, if you consider that the entire economy, the entire world, and every person in it, in theory, needs to have access to electricity, needs to have access to power, that means that if you were to give each of those people just 1 times 100 watt light bulb, and they were only to use that 100 watt light bulb, say for 5 hours a day, that means that the grid, the amount of energy we're supplying the world at the moment, would need to increase by 37,500 megawatts per year. Now, just to put that in perspective, the largest power station on Earth produces 4,700 megawatts. That means in order just to power the new population of people that are emerging every day and giving them 1 light bulb to run just for 5 hours, you would need to build 80 new power stations every year. Now the problem that you have with this, aside from the obvious costs involved, is that at present the largest power station on Earth has taken roughly 10 years to complete, and it's still not complete. If you were then to change the technology and say, okay, look, we're going to go nuclear, it's going to take roughly 20 to 25 years to complete. Now I'm not going to talk about the costs just yet. What I am going to talk about the technology, and I'm going to talk about the reasons why renewable energy is by far more viable than traditional fossil fuel powered industries. So let's start like this. Every single day, every single minute, the sun is providing more power to this earth. In fact, if you wanted to put it in perspective, it's roughly 38 times 10 to the power of 23 kilowatts per hour hitting this planet. That is an enormous amount of energy. To put that in perspective, it means that you could power roughly 2,880 trillion 60-watt light bulbs. I mean, so if you imagine the enormity of the amount of energy that is hitting this planet, it is just by far larger than anything we're going to produce from fossil fuels. The difficulty that we have is not the fact that there is enough renewable energy. The difficulty that we have is harnessing that renewable energy. How do we go about harnessing it? So now let's take a look at the fossil fuel industry. Everything that you know about power is about turning a wheel. That's what it's about. If you take a look at nuclear power splits an atom, flash boils water, the steam is driven through steam turbines, and the turning turbines, it's that old magnet concept going around a copper coil, they produce the output, which is electricity. If you then take a look at coal fire, same thing, they take coal, they set fire to it, they boil a whole bunch of steam, and that steam is driven through a steam turbine, turns a wheel, and manufactures the power. This goes through almost any kind of fossil fuel, including hydro. Hydro is just water pushing a wheel that turns a magnet around a coil or a coil around a magnet and produces your power. And this is how all power on Earth is currently made. The problems that you have with that is that aside from the ongoing costs in terms of building a coal-fired power station, there's also a continual input cost required to keep feeding it. So with the exception of hydro, every single kind of power that you currently have on this planet requires a continual input stream. Nuclear requires uranium, coal requires coal, gas requires petroleum and natural gas. It is a continual feed. And it's for this very reason that you will never, ever, ever have free power. Ever. Because it's just not possible. It is not possible when they have massive ongoing costs, to run a 4,800 megawatt coal-fired power station requires 14.9 million metric tons of coal just to power just the coal. We haven't even talked about the maintenance and the ongoing costs in terms of, ensuring the stability of supply. That is the volume of coal that is required just to maintain it. It's roughly $15.4 million US blown a year just on feeding that thing. So at the end of the day, is it possible that we could produce a renewable energy plant that is comparable to coal? So I did a little assessment, a little summary. If you take that the largest coal-fired power station is 4,800 megawatts, and I was to build an equivalent photovoltaic plant that meets the output potential of the coal-fired power station, it would cost for the coal-fired, which was predicted to cost $5.4 billion US, but that's assuming that it was complete. It was supposed to take, I think, 8 years to complete, and it was supposed to cost $5.4 billion. At present, it's still not complete. They're in their 9th year, and it's cost roughly $10.1 billion US. Now, it's still not complete, so heavens knows how far that's going to go. But the same equivalent in terms of photovoltaics costs $4.8 billion US, can be completed within the space of 2 years, and will provide you free ongoing electricity for the entire duration of its life, which is estimated to be roughly 25 years. Now, if you think about it, there is a very low maintenance cost on all kind of photovoltaic plants. Very low. They've got to clean the plants, they've got to make sure the power supply, make sure the inverter's okay, but it's ridiculously low by comparison to the amount of energy and time that goes into coal. So just put this in perspective. Here you have this giant coal-fired power station consuming vast amounts of coal, which funds these massive industries of people that have to mine for the coal and transport the coal and put the coal in the coal fire, burn the coal, produce the power, run the maintenance on it, and that is how we plan to power it. But yet, let's bear in mind that every single hour of every single day, the sun is producing enough power to power every single device on Earth for free. So if you consider the concept, here on the one hand you've got a solar photovoltaic plant, on the other hand you've got a coal-fired plant. And this one costs no input, and this one costs continual input. Why is it that we continually choose coal over renewables? Now, a lot of people, when they hear this concept, they say, no, renewables have been tried. We see these big wind turbines, and the amount of costs and coal and oil that goes into the construction of these big wind turbines. This is the problem. And then there's all these subsidies, and then there's all of these input costs, and then it turns out that it just costs us more money. Every time the government, specifically in Canada, every time the government wants to go and build a new green plant, it just costs us more, and all the subsidies, it's just another way for the government to tax us. And they're absolutely right. There is absolutely no argument against that. I agree with you 100%. But the reason why it is like that is the exact same reason why the government continually goes for coal over renewables. And the reason is this: the people that are generally employed as ministers of energy, or people that are designed to kind of input or inform the government about what it is about costs in terms of, how much it costs to build coal fire and the decisions that they make, why they should take coal. The reason is most of these people are engineers or business associates of people that came from the petroleum industry, or the coal industry, or the coal energy industry, the fossil fuel energy industry. The majority, almost 95% of every single person making a decision in relation to your power comes from the very industry that is charging you money. And ironically, it's a small group of people that are actually making this decision. This isn't a decision that's put out openly and like it's highly debated. It's actually a small group. It's a couple of people. They say, hey, you know what, we're gonna go coal. And they drive it, they put it forward as an agenda, and that's what happens. Now, obviously, the World Bank, being concerned about climate change, they've made some changes. They've stipulated saying that, we're gonna give you a loan so that you can build infrastructure that you require to power your country, but you have to have a proportion of it on renewables. Now, this threw a lot of kind of tail feathers for everyone. Nobody was very happy with that. They needed access to the finance so they could add extra grid capacity to their countries, but they were compelled to use some kind of renewable. So what a lot of people did was they put it out to tender. Now, here in South Africa, it was actually a joke. It was an absolute joke. And I'll tell you why. You see, the government is not producing renewables, nor are they producing coal. They are actually putting it all out to tender. Now, if you take a look at the kind of companies that are involved inside of these tenders, inside of, or even the fossil fuel tenders, they are ridiculously wealthy companies. They are ridiculously wealthy. Everyone's driving around in beautiful cars. They've got this massive infrastructure. They filled up to the wazoo in engineers, and they basically apply their trade, relying on the credibility of their past results, and they basically put forward these kind of tender bids to the government. And because they are so financially powerful, their bids look shiny and beautiful. And the government has to choose something. It has to choose amongst a group, a set of bad options. In the renewable world, these guys basically milked the entire process. In this country, in South Africa, in this country, if you went to the actual, so when our Department of NERSA, our Department of Energy, put out the concept of a tender for renewable feeds, they had a meeting and they invited a whole bunch of people, renewable people. And I was at that meeting because I'm a renewable guy. And we walked into that meeting and there was roughly, 1,200, 1,300 people, a lot of people that were at that meeting. And ironically, there was maybe about 10 South African people. The rest of the people were foreigners. They're foreigners that basically came in and they were putting in the bids. And obviously, because the bid was slanted in favor of having some local content, every single person and every single company was just talking about how to overcome those obstacles. But the basis of your wealth was going to fund those giant energy companies that were supplying either solar panels or inverters, or in the terms of fossil fuels, they were going to go fund the companies that manufacture this. Mitsubishi, these massive companies that have massive bank balances, and the same principle applies on both sides. And so the government cannot actually give you free power, because the problem here is that the government enters rubbish agreements. It's not possible for them to give you anything for free. It's not possible for them to give you renewable for free because the government was overcharged for the renewable to start with. They were overcharged for the price of the wind turbines to start with. They were overcharged for the price of the solar panels to start with. And so what happens is the government ends up doing a subsidy, and that subsidy rolls out in your bill. And that's why most people, a lot of people, have the concept that solar power is expensive. But it isn't. It's just because the government entered bad agreements on your behalf. And likewise, with the petroleum industry or fossil fuel kind of derived power base, those people that are sitting in their positions actually only want fossil fuel or nuclear power base. That's all they actually want. But they have to do this portion, as I said. But the fact is, they're getting as ripped off as anyone else. You see what happened in the UK recently, where there was some monster loan that was being given to the UK by France in order to power these monster nuclear kind of power stations, and the deal just was so big, was so vast, that nobody wanted to sign it. In fact, it's been taken to court and the whole process has been thrown out. Here in South Africa, we were offered, Russia came forward and said, hey, listen, we'll build your power stations, but you're going to owe us $1 trillion. $1 trillion. Now, this is a poor country. I mean, we don't have a lot of money to start with, and yet we're going to indebt ourselves for $1 trillion for what? For what? For nuclear power? And it's going to be overpriced. It's going to be slow in delivery, like 20 years. It's going to have the byproduct of nuclear waste. It's going to have a problem where it has to actually mine for uranium in order to feed it. And so here we are sitting in a situation where, in a way, the people that are making decisions based around your power, your income, are actually a hung jury. They're hung. They are in a way so embedded with the traditional status quo that they refuse to look for anything else. They refuse to even consider anything else. And yet, in the back of your mind, you have to remember that every hour the sun is producing more power than we are ever able to even harness, that we're even able to use. So how is it possible? How is it possible, if you consider the craziness of the abundance of free natural power that is in this world, that every time the wind blows, that's energy. Every time the ocean rises, that's energy. Every time the sun shines, it's energy. Do you know it makes energy even on your skin? Every cell and every atom everywhere on Earth interacts with the sun and produces energy. That's the light that you see, that's energy. And it's free. Now, how is it possible that we can still be stuck in this mind concept of having a fossil fuel derived power source when energy is free? Now, the problem that we have here is that we have a bunch of people that have made huge amounts of money, huge, vast amounts of money by ripping off the government. But the beauty is the basic mechanics of all free power is that you can harness it, however inefficient or efficient. You can harness it and you can produce it, and you can produce it for free on an ongoing basis. And every day, new technologies impact the market, come into the market. There was a time that we could only harness energy from daytime hours. Now they've changed that they've got solar PV modules that are able to harness not only from daytime hours, but also from infrared bands, meaning that it's picking up heat movement and able to generate power like that. There was a time that we could only store energy in lead acid battery cells, and then it jumped up and it went to gel and AGM as a new type of electrolyte in that cell. And now it did a bigger jump and it's just gone to supercapacitors. Supercapacitors that will run for 41 years, and it's not expensive. It's cheap. It's cheap. It costs $600 per kilowatt of stored energy. You could run your entire house forever. The storage medium would outlast your house, and in fact, in most cases, would outlast all the people in the house. And that just goes to show you the power. There's no electrolyte, there's no gas. It's a supercapacitor. There's a 98.6% round-trip efficiency in terms of delivering power and releasing power. It will last forever. And these technologies are here, they're in our hands. Another concept which has been proposed forward is a heat cell. Now, so what happens is, And I mean no offense to engineers or people that may be watching this, but engineers over-engineer things. That's what they do. They over-engineer things to the extent that it is so over-engineered that it becomes a complex something. I remember when I first started out about 15, 16 years ago in the renewable energy industry, everything was so complex. It was so complex. And every time you spoke to an engineer about it, it would all be dressed up like this really hard concept. You know, and then you've got to understand the P phase and the N phase of the solar cell. And it all turned out to basically be rubbish. It's a basic fact. Sunlight hits cell, releases electron. Electron collects on a P phase. It's a simple, truthful, mechanical process, and it's happening every minute. And so by putting out a set of PV, and by no longer paying ridiculous prices or listening to the rubbish that you hear about, this solar panel is by far better than this solar panel, it's meaningless. It's meaningless. The efficiency difference between two solar cells, or the heat tolerance between two solar cells, is pathetically small. It's really, really tiny. And yes, there are better solar panels that have better kind of efficiency, but the reality is the difference is so small, it's almost irrelevant to a person who's just trying to get by, just putting power up on his roof. He's just trying to make power for himself. It's irrelevant. You can actually make power from almost anything. And so, I don't want to bore you, I don't want to go on too long about this, but the reality is that there is a hung jury that is making power decisions on your behalf. It is possible for you to have free power. It is possible for the world to have free power. A solar PV plant laid out the size of a 4,800 megawatt coal-fired plant will pay for itself 4.2 years. It will provide you with an additional 21.8 years of free power. Free. The problem that we have here is not the technology. The problem that we have here is the government's desire to control it. The government's desire to continually charge you for something. The reality of this situation is very straightforward. If you put up, or the government stops giving away monster tenders to these ridiculously wealthy companies, starts producing the solar cells themselves, the kind of supercapacitors themselves, the wind turbines themselves, stop outsourcing it. Stop giving it away to wealthy companies. Produce it yourself. It's not a technological difficulty. It's simple. The fact of the matter is, it creates industry. It creates jobs. People need to go and work assembling solar systems, assembling wind turbines, assembling concentrated solar PV plants. They need work, and there is work available if the government stops outsourcing it. And at the end of the day, the second big shift in logic that has to happen is this. The government needs to stop thinking that for a lot, like here in Cape Town, the local government launched an initiative called net metering, meaning you put up solar PV up on your roof and they pay you, and it's only really useful for large commercial kind of solar plants. For a guy putting up solar panels on his roof, financially it's not viable at all. In fact, it'll cost you money. And the reason why the government, and in this case the municipality, still wants to cling to it is because they make a lot of money out of it. They make a lot of money out of it. And the reality of the situation is that they've got to give up that concept. They've got to stop with that concept of needing to make money out of everything that they give us. They need to free up the grid. The grid needs to be free. People that put power onto the grid need to put in power that offsets their bill and nothing else. No more talk about rebates. It needs to be obviously a stable system. You can't have, and it needs to have safety for the people that are working. Those are basics. But they've got to give up on the concept of charging you. If I produce power on my roof, and that roof, and I use this much power from, say, X grid, it needs to be offset. Needs to be offset. They've got to free the concept of the grid. They've got to free it. And on top of it, they've got to start to create industry that's driven by renewables and get away from the concept of fossil fuels, because mathematically speaking, it is not possible that a fossil fuel derived source of power can ever be cheaper than a renewable power source. The same goes, sorry, my apologies. Same goes for nuclear. It is impossible for anybody to even, in their right mind, to even consider that nuclear energy is somehow, cheaper than a free power source. There is nothing associated with a renewable power source. There is only input costs, ongoing management costs, potential economic meltdown or system meltdown costs for nuclear. Why even look at it? It's just because the people that they are employing, put in power, are coming from an industry where they can only see one thing. They are hung, they are not in your favor. And you can change this. You can change this. We can have free power. We can. The technologies are there. If you look at the links below my name, I'm going to send you a whole bunch of links that will prove. So I'll also show you the financial proving, the financial modeling that I've used inside of this conversation. In addition to it, I'm going to send you all the links that have associations with why it is that power can be free. Then I'll also send you some links that will show you why it is that coal and that nuclear is not a viable source of energy. That whole concept that everyone talks about, well, there's no base load for renewable. And what happens when the sun goes down? That is dead. It is dead. It's been dead almost for 5 to 10 years. I mean, it is a dead concept. It is possible to produce a base load using heat, just even heat. We're not even talking something advanced, basic heat. You don't even need, the Israelis, they have this concept where you store it in salts and it goes through a phase change and blah, 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 and that's how you store energy. It's a brilliant idea. Israelis, very clever people, but you don't need it. You can store the heat even in cement if you want. It's so simple. The concepts, the basic mechanics behind renewable energy are simple. And they've got to stop being overlooked. And they will only start to be considered and brought into the mainstream when you start to talk about it, when you start to question it, when you start to apply pressure on your government to, first of all, free up the grid, free the grid. Stop signing ridiculous contracts with ridiculously wealthy countries or companies. Stop it. Start implementing renewable technologies, but start manufacturing it yourselves. It's cheap. And then, last and not least, you've got to try and alter the political will that believes that we can only do things in the set fossil fuel way. It's got to die. So, that was my concept of free power. As I said, all the information is stored below us.
What about Chile?
Oh, right, well, all right. Okay, sorry, I've just been reminded about something. About 6 years ago, no, 5 years ago, something like this, 6 years ago, in Chile, they had this very debate that I'm actually asking you to start to have with your government, okay? They had this debate relating to should they go nuclear, should they go coal fire. They had a big energy problem, energy costs were dramatically high, and so what they did was, for some obscure reason, somebody with some intelligence inside of Chile said, hey, you know what, we're going to go renewable. And so they started building these solar PV power plants. And the data is a bit old in my head, but they rolled out with, a couple of 2 megs, and then they jumped it up to 100 megs, and they started building up these massive plants. But the Chilean government didn't stop there. They actually used their brains, what I'm asking you to do with your government. They actually said, you know what, we're making this power from the sun, and it's free. So instead of us now going, hey, I'm going to keep charging you for that kilowatt of power, it didn't cost us that much money to make because it's free. So what they did was, they said, okay, to the consumer, you have that back. For 129 days, the Chilean people had free power so far. I mean, that was a report that I did maybe a month and a half ago, but it was free. Now imagine a world in which you live that that you're running a company and you're already struggling under the ongoing bills, and all of a sudden you get an electricity bill which traditionally would be, I don't know, a couple $2,000, $3,000, and now it's gone. You get a zero. And you don't get a zero in month 1, you get a zero in month 2, you get a zero in month 3. Now think about it. The beautiful concept of that. That money is finally able to be utilized somewhere else. You're able to spend it, you're able to start to lift up your economy again, and that's the truth of the matter. The government is always concerned they need to take the money somehow from your safekeeping, but what they forget is that money that they leave in the consumer's pocket ultimately finds its way into the market. Very few people sit and stack money under their bed anymore. Most people spend it in the leisure industry, they buy new equipment for their plants, they basically stimulate the market. Again, they stimulate the economy again. So they haven't lost the money. It's just a shifting concept in their head. Their head has to change. They don't need to take that money away from us so that they can utilize it for whatever the hell they want to do. They need to allow us to choose. And the beautiful thing is there's a whole stimulation around the entrepreneurial market, because all of a sudden people that have extra money are saying, hey, you know what? That's not a bad thing. And they start investing money into the emerging market. And it's a massive boost to an economy. Now, I don't care what you say. A lot of people are going to come at me in different angles. A lot of people are going to agree with me. A lot of people are going to say whatever they like to say. But nothing I have said here is in any way incorrect. Nothing. The basic truth, however you research it, however you go about picking up your information, is there, and it's sound. And if you want to close your eyes and come up with a counter-argument as to why I can't, well, whatever. I can't stop people from doing that. But the truth is there. There is more power available to us now freely, and we can harness it. You don't need to keep paying these bills. You don't need to do it anymore. You just need to start to push for change where you are. I'm not even talking about the environmental impacts or the environmental benefits, of which there are numerous. I mean, obviously, renewable power is massively more beneficial to the environment than any of fossil fuel anything. I mean, I don't even have to talk about that. What I am talking about is you keeping your money and the government changing its mind and basically re-stimulating the economy through an application of sense. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you on this beautiful day, and I hope you're having a beautiful day wherever you are. Remember, all the links are below me down here somewhere. I don't know if you can even see my hands, but I hope you have a great day. I'm going to have a great day, and thank you and goodbye. Hello and welcome to ENN, the Environmental News Network. We are sitting here in the beautiful Cape Town. It's a bit overcast today. I'm not going to do what I normally do, in which case I cover some news stories that have come out this week. We're going to shoot that later towards the end of this week, so you can look forward to that at the end of the week. What we're going to do today is we're going to have a little discussion that kind of falls hand in hand with a very similar styled release that we did about overfishing. We did this last week. We got quite a large response from that. But I found it quite interesting that down a similar line that we should start to focus on what's going on in the oceans. It seems that mostly the responses we got were positive. But I also seem to think that science being what it is, you get a lot of scientists that are focusing on various different areas or branches of science, and they don't seem to unify them. Science is a very focused kind of concept. You'll have one scientist that is working on whatever quantum physics or branch of quantum physics, and you've got another scientist working on something else completely, and they very rarely marry together to form a coherent picture. Since my job, or Mother Channel's job, is about bringing you news, we've had to do a lot of research into news and stories that are emerging in relation to climate change, in relation to overfishing, extreme weather, the effects of ocean acidification, and the ongoing kind of state of the environment. But what it does is it allows you to start to see a much broader picture of what is actually going on in the planet, as opposed to seeing these very narrow kind of snatches that you may or may not pick up in news that is around you. So today's kind of story is about microplastics. Now, for those of you that don't know, microplastics is contained in almost every product that you kind of use in your bathroom, from hair shampoo all the way through to toothpaste. In fact, if you use toothpaste as an example, the reason why they put microplastics in toothpaste is so that it gives it that abrasive effect that removes plaque from your teeth. It is an inert substance, purely plastic, and in itself it is, it's oil based obviously, but it's not necessarily problematic in and of itself. But what happens is people all around the world, they make use of substances or kind of products that contain microplastics, and standing at your basin, all of those microplastics, they drain down the drain. What's supposed to happen is that they should be ultimately, hopefully, picked up down the line, but being micro, two of them can fit in kind of roughly a hair kind of follicle. They're really, really small. They're not picked up by any filtration system. So they're not picked up either by, any sewage or kind of wastewater system. And generally what happens is they flush directly out into the sea. Now, in a way, this is kind of out of sight, out of mind. But there is another kind of phenomena that's happening in the ocean, where everyone has been speaking about the volume of plastics, so from drinking water bottles, some, in fact, news this week, some countries, some states in the United States completely banned plastic water bottles, which is a good start, but in a large respect, the damage has already been done. Those water bottles, they kind of work against each other, they degrade each other with the sunlight, and they basically sink to the bottom of the ocean floor, where they are joined up with this flow of microplastics that we use in daily household products. Now, microplastics are inert, so they kind of sink to the bottom of the ocean, but because they are oil-based, they are able to attract kind of other oil-based and other chemicals around them. So what happens is microplastics act as almost like a catalyst in terms of attracting other chemicals, highly toxic chemicals in some cases, around them. And then what happens is filter feeders, they basically start to, or suction feeders, what do they call them? Gill feeders. They basically, it's not the right name, but they suck up the parts of the ocean floor, and they suck these microplastics into their bodies. Now, obviously, these microplastics are toxic both to the fish and obviously to the ocean. But there's been higher and higher and higher concentrations of microplastics. And as you know, there's a food chain that goes on in the ocean. So what happens is a smaller fish is eaten by a bigger fish, and eventually the cycle goes on until it's ultimately, eaten by commercial fish. So the commercial fish are therefore ingesting microplastics back into their own system, and that microplastic then gets delivered back onto your table. So there's a big cycle that goes through from the microplastics that are used inside of your toothpaste or your hair wash. It's a big cycle ultimately going through the food chain until it lands back in your gut. But they don't land back in your gut as an inert plastic. They land back in your gut filled with toxic chemicals. Now that is a truth cycle. That is a big problem that is going on all over the world. And that problem, you can actually take a sample of water anywhere in the world, and there will be a large proportion of microplastics in it. And so you can see how this is starting to have, first of all, effect on human health. But generally, I find a lot of people, they're prepared to throw aside the concept of impact of human health. So I'm going to add a couple of, if you consider that our main narrative, so that's our main story, I'd like you to remember a couple of things. Do you remember the Rio Games that are currently going on? They had a report that came out recently about multiple drug-resistant bacteria that was found in the water, where they were intending to go and do the sailing events. They even had one German kind of Olympic entrant for sailing, not wanting to touch the water because he felt that it was dirty, and in fact he was absolutely right, it was polluted. And it was polluted because there is a world legislation in terms of the amount of sewage that needs to be refined, processed, cleaned before it's put out into the sea. And as it turns out, it's 51%. So that means that of all the stuff that is flushed down into our drains and into the sewage system, only 51% of it actually needs to be processed before it gets shoved out into the ocean. Now, why does bacteria all of a sudden develop some kind of immunity or some kind of response in terms of its toxicity and its ability to infect people? Why does a bacteria go through a gene shift? The reason for this is because of those chemicals that are in the water. For argument's sake, I saw an advert on television yesterday. It was for a bleach, like a drain cleaner. It was Domestos. And people basically go and they squirt this drain cleaner inside of their toilets and brings this beautiful lush scent, and that basically gets flushed down the toilet. Now Domestos is an antibacterial property. Now, much in the same as humans, if you take an antibiotic, you don't finish the course. There is a high probability that you still contain the bacteria in you. And what that bacteria does is it learns an immunity to that specific strain of antibiotic. And this is happening all the time with all the chemicals that we are basically flushing down into the oceans. And that is what brought about this change in terms of what was going on about this highly virulent form of bacteria that was found inside of, at the Rio Games. So this is extremely problematic. But add to this now, we had a report. So this is just trying to keep you on the narrative. So add that little story that I've just told you about Rio on the side stream of the narrative. And you can see how these all start to kind of marry together. If you add to it, the World Wildlife Foundation, they basically released a report in terms of the chemicals that are being flushed into the Mediterranean. Then, of course, we had that report that we issued last week about how the Mediterranean is a barren desert. Basically it's an ocean, but it's a desert. There's no more life. There's just pieces of kelp, and the kind of ocean cycle or food cycle or life cycle of that ocean has dramatically changed as a result of being flushed into it. And then the World Wildlife Foundation picked up that there was actually a whole lot of unknown chemicals. These are chemicals that haven't been identified before. They've basically been married together by microplastics in the oceans. So the microplastics were actually causing different bonds to join inside of different chemicals and form whole new chemicals that nobody actually has any idea what they do. No idea. But we do know that they are likely toxic. They're definitely toxic to fish. You are therefore ingesting those fish. So remember our main narrative, we had the Rio Games, we had the World Wildlife Foundation talking about the chemicals into the sea. Now we've had a discussion about the report talking about the volume of chemicals that are in the Mediterranean. And then, of course, there are all those very popular stories about those big floating plastic islands that are basically sitting out in the ocean, slowly corroding, making more and more kind of microplastics as they degrade. But a new study has come out inside of this week that basically has proven that not only does the small larvae and kind of the smaller kind of filter feeders that live in the oceans, not only do they start to eat these microplastics, but they almost have a preference for these microplastics. And they are consuming vast quantities of this. But this is having a direct impact on their reproductive ability. The toxins are so strong in them that there's roughly a 30% reduction in the ability. So if you took a whole segment of larvae, you picked them up and you see how many could reproduce by comparison to how many can reproduce in the current ocean environment, there's been a reduction by up to 30%. and there's been a reduction of almost 50% in terms of their lifespan, which means that those toxins, those chemicals, are having a direct effect, a direct impact on the lifespan of those creatures and naturally on the health of those creatures. So obviously, if you take again a look at the whole narrative, at the impact of all of the chemicals that are flooding into the oceans, the effects that are being picked up by this scientist there in the Mediterranean, this scientist there in the States picking up the impact on larvae, there in Rio, the impact of what's going on in terms of, you know, the new bacterial strains that are found inside of the oceans, it's actually quite crazy. The problem is extremely real. So I posed it to a couple of people yesterday. I said, okay, now listen, here's the problem. I told them pretty much the same story that I've told you. And a lot of it, well, I mainly posed it to women. And generally, there is, you know, in as much as there is a sense of alarm about it, there is also a sense of kind of, well, you know, what can I do? You know, they're not making the products that are using microplastics. They utilize the products that are making, that are obviously have microplastics. And so this is a problem. If you consider that over half of the world's population are female, that gives you roughly, what, 3.5 billion people. And let's assume that a large proportion of those people are able to shower and have access to kind of modern day shampoos and modern day kind of toothpaste. And if you consider the volume of plastics entering into the ocean, it's huge. Then add to this little report that came out recently in relation to, you know, kind of the farming industry and how much kind of the pesticides and the kind of chemicals that they're spraying all over their crops, and what happens to those, that the chemicals are going off into the waterways and eventually into the rivers, and from the rivers into the seas. You can see that there is almost a permanent chemical runoff coming off the land. And there are very few actual alternatives to it. So what I'd like to do is this. Obviously there are some kind of, you know, generalized alternatives to this, but what I'd like to do is this. I'd like to pose whoever is watching this a challenge. I really believe that where you have a problem, you have an opportunity to resolve it. There is a dire need for high-grade, you know, kind of women cleaning products and toothpastes and things that a person uses on a daily basis, but do not contain, you know, destructive chemicals or do not contain microplastics. There is a huge industry awaiting you. For anybody who's watching this that has the entrepreneurial ability to think up these products, bring them to market, we will, you know, on our channel, we'll even advertise them for you. Let's make this, you know, it's much easier for me to go and say, listen, here is a viable alternative to your, you know, great hair shampoo. Here's a viable alternative to your toothpaste. It's much easier to bring people alternatives that are healthy, good, and pure. Give them the information that I've just given you and allow them to make the decision. Invariably, women being the nurturers amongst us, invariably make the right decisions. They don't want to eat toxins. They don't want to eat microplastics. The big predatory fish that you're finding in sushi, you know, they pulled samples from the livers. They pulled samples from the actual flank, the meat, what you eat. They are filled with microplastics. To cap this little story off, I'm going to just add a little impact. If you have been watching my shows, I basically talk a lot about sharing, you know, so sharing in the hope that what we can do is form a kind of mass movement, because as I've always explained, we're a demographic to a political party. By having enough people of the same thinking, of the same mind, of the same concerns, it's a matter of time before new politicians start to spring up preaching the very things that we need to have done. And here is another great example of it, and I love to bring up these examples of it, but the Chesapeake Bay previously was having massive problems in terms of, big ocean, lake dead zones. They're absolutely depleted of any oxygen. And so the nearby city, they implemented the first kind of air quality controls and rigorously maintained these. They did this roughly about 5 years ago. Now, the result has been that, first of all, the atmosphere above the city has completely almost cleared itself. It's become cleaner, there's less smog, there's less generalized atmospheric pollution. First time in this week, a report came out showing the response that the river was having to it. All the deoxygenated zones that we were seeing, both in the river, both downstream in terms of the bay that it was feeding, they have completely cleared themselves out. The river has higher oxygen content, more balanced nitrogen content, and has started to reform almost, river estuaries. They've started to reform the kind of life forms that would feed off these things. It's become an attractive place to go. Attractive place if you're a fish, that is, but it's become an attractive place to be. And it just goes to show you how adjustments in terms of legislation can start to bring around like immediate results. In this case, it was 5 years. Now, what I've proposed to you is a main narrative, a main story, based around microplastics, the impact that microplastics will have. I've also suggested to you a whole lot of other surrounding stories, because scientists always only focus on single pieces that are all related to this. And if you think about it, you can see the scale of this problem. But you can also see a potential resolution in the form of an opportunity. The person that brings this market something that is good, clean, healthy, does the same job in terms of making your hair smell, in terms of cleaning your toilet so it's lemon fresh, but without destroying chemicals or nasty chemicals flooding into the ocean. And lastly, as we've already been picking up in our 5-point plan, a shift over to organic farming, for argument's sake, completely rids the flow of chemicals coming off farmlands into the waterways, into the rivers. And if you think about that last story that I had about the impact of coal ash, how it's bringing about arsenic in the various different waterways, and how it's actually being picked up by farmers' boreholes. So the reality is that these are very solvable problems, but not only are they solvable, they also are great opportunity. And where there's great opportunity, there is great minds behind it to drive it, to make it happen. And so let's make it happen. Let's bring about that change. Let's start to drive the legislation in our areas that what we're talking about is clean air. We're talking about clean products that are not destroying our oceans, and we're talking about clean forms of living that are not causing a permanent chemical runoff into our oceans. I hope you enjoyed today. I enjoyed telling you. As I said, we're going to get a news update at the end of this week where I'll bring you some really cool stories. There's been some really cool stories that have happened inside this week. Some good news, some not so good news. But generally, I think that if you consider what I've been saying, consider where we're going, I think it's time that you share this. Just click on that little share button, share it with the people that you know. Let's make it happen. Thank you so much for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day. Hello and good morning, and welcome to Mother Channel. My name is Jason Soul, reporting for the ENN Network. It's a beautiful Sunday. Going to cover some stories that came out this week, but there's actually been some really nice summary stories that came out this week. On Friday, I released a video update that was relating to the basic mechanics of climate change. We received a lot of very positive support from that. We also received some negative kind of feedback from people that are clearly deniers of climate change, or rather non-believers in the concept of climate change. I tried my best in the previous update to kind of bring them into a state of reality. So I'm going to address today, first of all, some of the news, and maybe you've heard it or maybe you haven't, but I urge you to check it out for yourself. I'd like to challenge anybody watching this movie, go onto Google and Google extreme weather news. And you will find out for yourself exactly what sort of extreme weather, which always is the frontal kind of shift in a varying climate. But go Google extreme weather, see for yourself what is happening all over the world. The events are simply catastrophic. California is in its longest drought that it's ever had, to the point of where, so far 66 million trees have been reported as dying. Obviously they become a fire hazard. You've already seen the raging fires that are going on inside of California, and in specific in the Sierra Nevada. In addition to this, in Phoenix, an aeroplane couldn't land because the tarmac was actually starting to melt due to extreme temperatures that were being experienced in Sierra Nevada, all across the United States, all across India, most of Asia, here in Southern Africa. You had temperatures reaching over 50 degrees and above. This is almost a continued kind of problem, month in and month out. In Karachi in Pakistan, they're experiencing such water shortages that the intensity of what's going on there is actually forced for the first emergence of what we're going to call climate refugees. These are people that are fleeing a certain area because the climate has shifted so dramatically for so long that they are no longer able to exist in a previously known area of existing. In this case, Karachi, Pakistan. They're saying that it's applying massive political pressure. It's applying massive human misery. In Ethiopia, they're back to having one of the longest droughts they've ever had in 50 years. This is also implied in terms of famine. The tornado season is just warming up in the United States, but for the first time, China starts experiencing tornadoes. Tornadoes are being experiencing here almost year on year, every single month, for the last year and a half, a new climate record has been broken almost everywhere in the world. Most of Europe has been experiencing flood after flood after flood. It's becoming like the new normal. And yet you still have people that run around thinking, hey, well, we can be okay like this. We can carry on doing exactly what we do and be okay like this. Well, I got some news for you. I mean, Einstein once said that the moment that bees die off, that within the space of 5 years, most humans will die off too. And I'm not sure of the exact phrasing, was actually something similar to that. And the reason why he said that is because bees are a corner key species, meaning that their pollination ability is it's unbeatable. The bees pollinate more flowers than almost any other living species. With the loss of bees, you lose the pollination. Now, a new report coming out, trying to first of all find out why all those bees are dying all over the world, because bees are dying all over the world. But they also seem unable to locate their food source, their pollination source. And it has just been shown that they're failing to find their pollination source simply due to the volume of air pollution that is in the atmosphere. Bees are the tiny micropollutants that are associated with carbon monoxide have had such an extreme reaction to bees that it is confusing them. They're unable to smell where they're going. They're unable to signal to the rest of the hive where to find the pollen. And this is causing a mass dieback in terms of bees. On top of this, then you have the added kind of negative that comes from Monsanto's drive towards nicotine-based kind of fertilizer, nicotine-based pest control, and the impact that it's had on bees. In many countries around the world, it's been made illegal, so you're no longer allowed to use nicotine-based kind of pesticides on crops. But still, the impact that it had on the bees as a species is dramatic and huge. Now mussels, which is a common kind of food dish that people have from all over the world, it has now just been shown that due to the increasing acidity of the water, due to the increasing temperature of the water, that mussels will likely be off the menu of the world within 85 years. Now that may seem like a long period of time, but understand, it doesn't, you have mussels every single day up until 85 years, in which case they dramatically fall off. It is a slow deterioration of mussels all around the world until you get to the point that it is no longer commercially viable to actually harvest mussels for the table because it's just too expensive. So I want you to consider something now. If you look at it, you've got all of these extreme kind of events that are happening. But you're not hearing about it on any other channel. I mean, you hear about it on my channel, but you're not hearing about it on any other channel. You hear every now and then, hey, there was a flood there, or hey, there's a raging wildfire there. But the fact is that something is happening. Now, it just happens that it corresponds with an increase in global temperatures. News reports that came out saying that we're no longer able to keep the global temperature between 1.5 to 2 degrees. This is serious news. It's serious. But it was never reported anywhere else. It's basically reported here and to those scientists that actually took the time to go ahead and read it. And so I wondered to myself, why? Like, why is it that it's not covered? Why? What is the problem here? And then I remember a couple of words that my producer doesn't really want me to talk about, but I think I'm going to just use it anyway. And that is that a lot of people seem to think one of three things. First of all, that climate change is somehow a hoax. That climate change was some kind of fraud perpetuated by Al Gore. And third, that climate change is some kind of means of taxing the population. It's a means of further redistributing wealth, your wealth, to the rest of the population. And so I want to be honest with you. There's only one real fraud or hoax going on here. And that is the fraud that we still believe we can keep polluting. We can keep running around with oil-based and carbon-based kind of fuel sources and keep polluting, and it's going to have zero effect. And if you consider it, when you watch anything, you know, whether it's Al Jazeera or whether it's CNN or anything else for that matter, you're not going to get told that, hey, you know, what you're doing here, this big industry that's worth multi-billions and trillions of dollars, these Saudi princes that drive around merely because they found oil below the ground, do you honestly think they are going to allow national mainstream media to report on the fact that their product, their wealth is derived from the destruction of your environmental future? Do you really think that's going to happen? Of course it's not going to happen. Is that a fraud? I've never in my life heard of a more clear-cut case of fraud. Is it a hoax? It is a hoax for us to believe that we can actually carry on doing this. We cannot carry on doing this. We cannot carry on destroying the planet and thinking there is, you know, absolutely zero effect that is going to happen to us. Because it is definitely going to happen. And if you just start Googling, spend a bit of time actually researching before trolling people that actually have been researching, go out and find out for yourself. Read it up for yourself. We're not making it up here. We are merely reporting on it because nobody else seems capable of doing it. Now, another concept that I've also been thinking about is that a lot of people seem kind of afraid of the idea of what it means to be environmentally sane. And this will address that final point that I made in terms of whether or not it's some kind of wealth redistribution program or some kind of hoax perpetuated by the government to further tax you further. I'm going to give you a picture of what the world could potentially be. Okay? And it's you know, for some of you it's going to be like, oh no, it's a hoax. It's not a hoax. The world is actually not a bad place. People seem to have the concept that somehow, merely because we want things to be done environmentally, that your world is going to change. You've got to go put feathers and shells in your hair, and that everyone's got to go get bongo drums, and they've got to go sit and watch the sun go down while chanting and playing their bongo drums on the beach. And nothing can be further from the truth. What we are referring to here is a variation in the way that business is done. A variation in the way that you are done. You see, my concept for you is very difficult for a lot of very ignorant people to swallow. It's very difficult. And there's a lot of ignorant people out there that would prefer to believe really lame concepts. So I realized quite some time ago, almost 14 years ago, that it was impossible for me to change their minds. Ignorance is bliss in the truest sense of the word. They will run around blissfully denying everything, but the fact of the matter is that they're flawed, they're wrong. And I don't have to change their mind, and neither do you when you talk to them. The reality of what we're trying to do here is about changing the environment around people and not trying to change the person. And what does that mean? It means this. Let's evaluate business based upon the actual result set of that business. Let's take a company. So for argument's sake, I'm going to talk about coal in this instance, which is it's an easy target. So you've got a guy, he's got a coal mine, or he's gone and found a source where coal maybe can be found, okay? And what he does is he will then go and do all these geographic kind of surveys. He will establish the how big the vein is, and he will go and he will develop a business plan. He'll present that business plan to coal mining companies. The coal mining companies will assess that business plan based upon the viability of the extraction of that coal and the distribution of that coal into the marketplace and the wealth that can be accumulated from that. And for years, they can operate with a business model like this. Is it such a bad, crazy shift of idea? Is it so scary that we expect that a company that's primary business is polluting our atmosphere to have some kind of impact for polluting the atmosphere, for correcting the atmosphere? And as I said to somebody this morning, I said, you know what? It's not about another rubbish tax, that the government's just going to tax you and they're going to take money from these companies and nothing ever happens from it. The government will just put that tax money into their coffers and they'll sit back and give each other raises and have a nice day. It cannot be in that model. It has to be in a model in which the actual result sets of that company, the funds that come from that company, are driven directly towards cleaning up their product. Is that such a bad thing, that a company is actually responsible for the byproduct of their product? Is it such a bad thing that a company evaluates the viability of a business based on the ability to destroy the environment for not only them, but the entire world population around them? Is that so bad? Is it so difficult to do? Take a look at electricity. A lot of people they spoke about things, the whole green movement is really just about taxing us further so that they can build up these power stations and these renewable stations and increase the cost of our electricity to offset the money that they've spent on renewable energy. And in a way, they are 100% right. They are 100% right. Most countries, including my own country, are going to do that. They are going to build up these massive solar plants and they're going to keep billing people. You will keep paying. There will be no direct benefit, implied or inferred benefit that is given to you. Can you pause quick? Okay, so my apologies, we were interrupted. I was talking about electricity. A lot of people seem to suspect that what will happen is the government, after making people pay extra for their electricity, for putting up these big, beautiful, either wind farms or concentrated solar farms or solar, just general photovoltaic solar farms, that the government will keep charging them and increase their taxation merely due to the government's kind of role in wanting to be green and wanting to offset emissions. Now, albeit that the government needs to offset their emissions, and albeit that it is part of their role towards controlling emissions, so moving from a coal-fired power source into a renewable source, this is all really good and well. But it is dangerous for the people that are already struggling with high power bills. So what is the fix to this? Well, we've already seen the fix to this, and there's no reason why this fix shouldn't be done everywhere in the world. Here in South Africa, that we have exactly the same problem, okay? Our government wants to put up solar farms. In fact, our government has put up solar farms. And yes, they bought those solar farms from big, European countries for a far greater rate than what is probably required. And yes, even though we have these giant solar farms or big solar farms, no benefit benefit or direct for the actual consumer of that power is received in any way. In fact, if anything, the price of our power has increased, and this is a fear that is happening all around the world. Again, back here in South Africa, our government then takes a look at its means of resolving this, and so what they do is they propose some trillion rand, and it's a rand for us, but trillion rand nuclear plants, which is actually insane. First of all, nuclear just takes forever to erect. It takes forever. There is never yet. In fact, I will be challenged. I challenge you to find me a single example of a single nuclear plant that is A, being delivered on time, and B, being delivered on cost, which means that the actual implied cost of what they're being offered is never realized at the end of the project. So, that's pretty much it for nuclear. If you consider how long it takes to put up nuclear, if you consider the amount of effort and energy that goes into just mining the uranium for nuclear, and then basically utilize that nuclear in terms of generating energy, and then the disposal of that kind of nuclear waste. I mean, it's a crazy concept. We're splitting an atom to boil water. That's essentially what we're doing. We're flash boiling water, and we're basically driving turbines. But to come back to my point, the problem here has nothing to do with what the government does. The problem has to do with us. The government is under the illusion that they somehow own our grid, where nothing can be further from the truth. The grid belongs to the people. It does not belong to the government. All the infrastructure in years ago, we were roughly equivalent at the South Pole in parts per million. That was a big, massive catastrophe that caused that to go over 400 parts per million, and then not permanently. Also, more alarming to this is that I mentioned to you the figure of where on average we were growing by 2 parts per million annually. But for the first time in Hawaii, the NOAG, which is a Oceanographic Center, it's an American National Oceanographic Center, but they basically measured that for the first time, parts per million rate, so the rate that we're contributing carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, has climbed to 3.02 parts per million. And this has never